Chapter 476. There was no air in the empty realm. No matter how fast the sword of the universe flew, there was no wind. Yet, Chinger still felt very cold. It was probably because there was no sound here. It was as quiet as a graveyard. Feeling scared, she intended to say something, but she gave up after taking a look in front of her. The snow girl sat in front of the sword, covered with a quilt, her eyes closed. It was unclear if she was cultivating or resting. Looking at her back, Jing Jiao was lost in thought, his eyes devoid of any emotion. Looking at his profile, Ching thought that the sword sect of Aoyama was truly bold. They even dared to bring a being like the snow girl back. Yet, this was not in line with Jing Jiao's temperament. Based on her understanding of him in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, he would never take such a risk. The mortals had a saying that they were asking a tiger for its skin. What was the meaning of cooperating with the snow girl and even subduing her? Wasn't Jing Jiao afraid that something might happen to him? It was true that if the Aoyama sect could subdue the snow girl, they would have the most powerful principal guard in history. However, how could a being like the snow girl be willing to guard the gate for someone else? The sword of the universe halted. The distant objects on the ground could be vaguely seen, but the peaks of Aoyama, enshrouded in the clouds and fog, were much clearer. The snow girl opened her eyes, looking in that direction in silence. Jing Jiao said, "That will be the place where you will live and grow in the future. If you agree to my terms, we'll go there together." Before Tong Yin saw the young masterly leave, Jing Jiao and the snow girl had a brief conversation, and they didn't hide it from Ching. Such an important agreement would affect the situation of the cultivation circle in Chaotian and even the future of a human race. So a true spirit of the heavenly state was needed as a witness. The general content of the agreement was that Jing Jiao was willing to provide a sufficient source of cold energy to help the snow girl survive, and the snow girl had a promise to go to Aoyama and not to cause any trouble, and she couldn't leave without his permission. Chinger was quite nervous. Looking at the snow girl covered in the quilt, she didn't know whether she should agree or refuse the agreement. After finding the snow girl in the cold mountain, Jing Jiao didn't inform Aoyama or White Town to kill her. It was a gamble with the fate of the human race. Even if the snow girl was only half as formidable as the queen of the snowy kingdom after she grew up, the cultivation circle wouldn't be able to control her. The worst part was that she had already arrived in the south of Chaotian, the central area of the human race. If she suddenly turned hostile and started a massacre, what kind of disaster would she bring? After a long time, the girl confirmed the agreement with Snow Mountain. It seemed that the extremely cold world of Jing Jiao was too attractive to her. It was spring now, and it was extremely warm in the south of Chaotian. The flowers and trees on the peaks of Green Mountain were in full bloom. It was a beautiful sight to behold. The mountain as he was mountain in Lan Songlin Mountain. He being Lin, he mountain Sudashan. He, the mountain, long, he mountain Sektachin. She suddenly sensed that the temperature around her had dropped a bit. The change was so slight that the flower petals didn't fall off, and most people couldn't even sense it. Yet, it couldn't escape the perception of her, a swordsman in the broken sea state. The great formation of Aoyama isolated heaven and earth. Such a sudden change indicated that something must have gone wrong. Looking at Shangda Peak covered with ice and snow, she arched her eyebrows slightly, wondering if the repair of the formation had not been completed yet. The cold source under the ground had leaked out a bit more. Shangda Peak consumed the most resources of Aoyama every year, but it couldn't even complete such a trivial task. The big brother was too preoccupied with a grudge against the big brother of the sect master and didn't even bother to discipline his disciples. A sword awareness suddenly came over from Tianguang Peak. The expression on Nan Wang's face changed slightly. He flicked his finger, and the sword sound spread all over Qingrong Peak. She returned to the manor cave with the wine jar in her hand. She said to the female disciples who had been summoned back in a hurry, "Don't ask me the reason. It's because I don't know either. From now on, everybody should stay behind closed doors in the manor cave. Nobody is allowed to come out without my permission." A bell rang on Shuriwa Peak, and an order came out in the grand hall in front of Shilai Peak. All the elders and regular disciples were summoned for a meeting, and then they all stayed behind closed doors, just like what had happened on Qingrong Peak. The fog grew thicker on the stone beam between the two peaks. Looking at the distance, the indistinct dark figure let out a sigh with a complicated emotion, and then strolled back to the deep part of the fog. Since the Dark Phoenix, the principal guard of Aoyama, didn't want to see him, few people in the world would want to see him. The top of Tianguang Peak was empty. The round turtle muttered to himself with his eyes closed, "I'm a stone turtle carrying a monument on my back. I'm not alive. I'm not alive. Don't come and see me." No monkeys could be heard on Shinma Peak, and the horses grazing on the slope were nowhere to be found. Lu Ada crouched on the windowsill of the Taoist hall, looking at the distant horizon with a nervous expression in his eyes, his tail flicking reflexively from time to time. He was not ready to fight at any moment, but to flee at any moment. Suddenly, a hand reached over, grabbed its tail, and carried it into its arms, walking into the cave. In the deep part of the manor cave, Gu Qing and Yuan Chu had no idea what had happened, and they were asking Zhao Liu about it. They were stunned when they saw Ping Yongka walk in with a white cat in his arms. The white cat was still in a state of bewilderment at the moment, because he couldn't figure out why someone dared grab his tail, save for the pair of brothers. "I don't know what happened either, but the sect master's sword has ordered everyone to go in a closed-door training. Why did you bring him in?" Zhao Liu looked at the white cat in Ping Yongka's arms with a slight frown. In her eyes, even if a strong enemy came to attack, the principal officer wouldn't take the initiative to confront the enemy. He would definitely go back to the manor cave to hide before anyone else. Ping Yongka looked innocent, thinking that the cat had been sleeping in the manor cave all the time. Since something big had happened today, how could he just leave it alone? The clouds were rolling, and summer was getting thinner. The great formation of Aoyama had opened a passage. The sword light illuminated the flowing clouds, turning them into dancing white silk. The sword of the universe was back. No one came to greet him this time, and no apprentices of Aoyama shouted, "Senior, Uncle Master." There was no sound of reading by the sword-rinsing stream, no crooked sword light around the Xingyan Peak, no wind on the top of Bihu Peak, and the surface of the lake was as smooth as a mirror. No one could be seen on the 9 peaks of Aoyama. It was so quiet that it was frightening. Seeing these scenes, Qing thought of the word grave again, feeling restless. The snow girl didn't feel anything, because she had no idea what Aoyama should be like. The sword of the universe landed on the top of Shanda Peak. There was nobody here. Even the sword justice, who stood in the deep part of the manor cave and remained silent while looking at the bottom of the well, was nowhere to be found. It was extremely cold on the top of Shanda Peak. The marks of snow and frost could be seen everywhere on the stone walls of the manor cave. The snow girl covered her entire body with a quilt, except for her eyes, a satisfied expression showing in her black pupils. Jingzhou hadn't been here for many years. He would feel a bit sentimental if he didn't come here, but he flew toward the bottom of the well in silence that day. The sunlight illuminated the bottom of the well. The peak of the universe fell down along with the light beam. The black dead dog crouched there in silence, looking like a mountain. Qing felt a sense of reverence in her heart, not daring to say anything. Jingzhou didn't say anything either, as if he hadn't seen the dead dog. He kept on heading toward the deep part of the sword jail. The dead dog opened his eyes slowly and looked at the small figure covered by the quilt. His eyes, which were as calm as the water, displayed a rarely seen vigilance. The snow girl turned her head around slowly in an attempt to see what this being, who was closer to her, had in mind. Jingzhou reached out his hand and turned her head around through the quilt. He stopped the two of them from looking at each other silently and bravely. Chapter 477. The deeper they went, the darker the passageway became. The sword of the universe was flying 2 feet above the ground, like a ghost. After leaving the nunnery, Qing thought of the word tomb for the 3rd time. Feeling a bit cold, She leaned toward Jingjiu subconsciously and grabbed his collar. On both sides of the passageway were hard stone walls carved with amulets. Powerful, forbidding formations were hidden in the stone walls. Was this the legendary sword jail of Aoyama? Why did Jingjiu want to come here? Sensing the coldness coming from the cliff walls, figured out the reason. There was a cold source at the bottom of the Shangda Peak, which was the coldest place among the peaks of Aoyama. It was the most suitable place for the snow girl to cultivate and live. What she didn't know was that the sword jail wouldn't be as tranquil as it was now. The cells on both sides of the passageway would emit a violent, ocean-like aura. Even a wisp of that violent, dark, and filthy aura could pollute the Tao tree of an ordinary cultivation practitioner and destroy their Tao heart. Many demons and devils with terrifying cultivation states were imprisoned in those stone cells. They were all ferocious creatures that could stop a baby from crying at night. But these prisoners didn't make any noise today. They tried their best to conceal their aura, not daring to let any of it leak out. The snow girl sat in front of the sword of the universe. She covered herself with a quilt. She didn't take a look at the cells on both sides, nor did she release her aura on her own initiative. She even used the inherited heaven sword to suppress her aura. But those prisoners could still sense her existence clearly, and they were filled with fear. Those demons had already knelt on the floor of the cells, touching their foreheads to the ground outside the stone door. They didn't dare to stand up as a sign of submission. The suppression of a higher-level being over a lower-level one was fully demonstrated at this moment. Jingjiu looked at the back of the snow girl in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. The snow girl suddenly uttered a cry. Jingjiu's pupils shrank slightly, but soon returned to normal. He said, "I'll find a suitable opportunity to release your people and send them back to the snowy kingdom." The snow girl didn't say anything more. The sword of the universe flew soundlessly. Soon, it arrived at the deepest part of the sword jail. It wasn't the darkest place. There was a faint light coming from the front, illuminating the stone walls and the ground. Suddenly, footsteps could be heard from one of the cells. Jingjiu knew that Marshal Uncle Tai Lu was imprisoned in this cell. The elder with the highest seniority in Aoyama was also shocked by Xue Jiayi's arrival and wanted to take a look at her. The deeper they went into the sword jail, the drier the air became, and the wider the passageway became. Eventually, it turned into a large hall. The floor was paved with green flagstones, and there were bright lamps hanging all around. There was a passage on the right side of the hall. The lights on both sides formed two lines, leading to a lonely stone chamber in the depths of the hall. The sword of the universe flew over noiselessly. It didn't meet any obstruction, and there was no aura of any restrictive spell or formation on either side of the tunnel. The furnishings in that cell were very simple but very complete. Other than the bed, there was also a table and a variety of utensils, all very exquisite. Water trickled down from the stone walls like a spring, splashing pearls and jades. The blue sky and white clouds projected by the instrument, as well as the green water of Aoyama, looked even more mystical with the mist. Ching thought that this was the proper way to treat a guest. Those gloomy and dreadful cells in front of her were nowhere suitable for a person to live in. But this stone chamber was a bit too simple and crude. She hoped that Her Highness wouldn't have any objection. "There's a cold source here, which can provide for your needs. You can take a rest here for a while. We'll see how to deal with it later." After saying this, Jingjiu left the stone chamber with Qing, walking toward the other end of the tunnel. His facial expression was natural, and his footsteps were steady. The sound of his boots hitting the ground was neither too loud nor too light. The door of the stone chamber was closed slowly. Jingjiu kept walking forward, silent and calm. But somehow, a tense and depressing atmosphere spread out, enveloping the entire tunnel. All of a sudden, the moaning of the Xue Jiayi was heard from the stone chamber. Jingjiu took another step forward, as if he hadn't heard the moaning at all. This step was the 13th step. Clang, 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 clang. Suddenly, the sound of a dozen swords rang out in the quiet tunnel. Qing Er's face was pale. She felt extreme fear. She looked back at the stone chamber and saw that 13 sword lights had appeared in the tunnel and then retreated into the stone walls, leaving behind countless fierce and chilling sword wills like lingering charm. Those sword wills were extremely powerful and terrifying, and their states were also extremely high. She shuddered with fear just by looking at them. The tunnel, which had been normal before, was instantly sealed by the sword formation. It was as if there were a dozen chasms in the middle, and it was impossible to pass through. "What's going on?" Qing looked at Jingjiao in shock. She found that his face was also very pale, and he looked extremely tired. It was as if he had used up a lot of energy, but his expression seemed to be much more relaxed. This prohibition was called the freezing of all things. It was derived from the locking autumn in the sword style of Aoyama, but its power and level were many times higher. It was composed of 13 sword formations, containing innumerable sword wills. Jingjiao took 13 steps after leaving the stone chamber, and 13 sword lights appeared in the tunnel. He wasn't setting up a formation, he was closing the door. "I asked you to come to Aoyama to rest for a while, but I can't tell how long it will take." He didn't turn around. Looking at the hall in front of him that was illuminated by the lights, he said, "Before I find a suitable method, I can only lock you up. This is the only solution." The stone chamber was quiet for a long time. Then the Shui Jie's moaning came again. It was a bit weak, and it was unclear whether she was angry or sad. Before humans can control a powerful force, they can hardly trust it. They would even rather destroy it. Jingjiao continued, "You should know this very well. So please agree with me, and please don't be angry." Having said that, Jingjiao didn't linger any longer, heading toward the outside. Seeing Jingjiao, Qing was stunned speechless, wondering what was going on. Didn't he invite the Shui Jie to come to Aoyama to be the principal guard? Why did he suddenly lock her up in the sword jail? Did he lie to her in the nunnery? Did he intend to trick her into coming to Aoyama? Jingjiao didn't say anything. He kept walking forward. His footsteps were as steady as before. The sound he made when he landed on the ground was the same as before, neither too soft nor too loud. It was unclear whether Jingjiao's mood was heavy or light at the moment, or if he wasn't affected at all. Qing felt even colder. It was not because of the cold source at the bottom of the sword jail or the dreadful demons and devils in the cells on the two sides of the tunnel. She thought Jingjiao was rather dreadful, so she didn't dare sit on his shoulder anymore. She returned to the green sky mirror stealthily. Jingjiao was aware of what was on her mind, but he didn't explain it to her. He walked to the front of Dead Dog. The sunlight shone down, illuminating the bottom of the well. Dead Dog and Jingjiao eyed each other without saying a word, but they could sense the heaviness in each other's hearts. It was true. Jingjiao agreed with Tong Yan's plan. He left the cold mountain with the snow girl, who was sleeping soundly. He didn't inform Aoyama or White Town. What he said to her in the nunnery, while waiting for her to wake up, was all a lie. This was not a scheme, a trick, a cold-blooded, greedy, or shameless act. It was the only solution. The snow girl was the offspring of the queen. If she came to the human world uncontrollably, she would bring a catastrophe to the human race. All the cultivation sects, including the Guocheng Temple and the deviant sects like the mysterious Dark Church, would demand her death. This situation was no different from what had happened in Taipingzhen back then, leaving the snow girl and Aoyama as the principal guard. It was impossible, and it would be attacked by the whole world, even if Aoyama was not afraid of it. Why? For some reason, which had nothing to do with sympathy, Jingjiao didn't want the snow girl to die. As such, he had to find a way to imprison her, and he had to imprison her. Was there any place in Chaotian that could imprison the snow girl? The fiend prison couldn't do it. Even if the old dragon was still alive, it couldn't imprison the snow girl. It was because she was a living being, and the old dragon was already dead. The sword jail in Aoyama was the only place where she could imprison the snow girl, and it had to be that particular cell. Taipingzhen had been imprisoned in that cell, and the powerful forbidding formation of sealing all things in ice had been set up in advance. Jingjiao could bring Zhao Liu into that cell back then because he was the key to this forbidding formation. Today, he brought the snow girl into that cell and came out again. All he did was close the doors of the cell with the key. His cultivation state was far lower than before, so he couldn't set up the formation of sealing all things in ice, but the doors were still the same, and the key was still the same. Even though the snow girl had grown up a bit, she was still not as powerful as Tai Pingzhenren back then. Since that cell could imprison Tai Pingzhenren for 300 years, it could also imprison her. As they left the cell, Jing Jiao behaved calmly, but he was actually extremely nervous. It was not because he felt guilty or felt sorry for the snow girl, but because he was worried that the snow girl might discover the problem and rush out of the cell in advance. These were the most difficult steps in his life. He had experienced such a nervous moment only 3 times in his long life. The first time was 600 years ago during the Civil War in Aoyama. He walked to Machen Peak with his big brother after eating hot pot with his sword. The second time was 300 years ago. He walked to his big brother with his sword after eating hot pot with Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing. The third time was today. In the passageway, the sword wills had all been hidden in the stone walls, and no formidable intent could be sensed. Yet, apart from the tiniest things in the world, like the mosquitoes in the fiend prison, nothing alive could pass through here. The snow girl sat on the bed in the cell in silence while wrapped in the quilt, looking a bit pitiful. All of a sudden, she lifted her head and looked at a spot. Huh! A tiny ice crystal landed on the ground and broke into pieces. It was unclear what it was. It was a mosquito in the fiend prison. Jing Jiao had done many things with the help of these invisible mosquitoes, but they were meaningless to her. In the next moment, something eerie happened. A thin line suddenly appeared on the snow girl's face, extending from the left side to the right side. It seemed that an invisible pen was drawing on the line. The line was very red, like blood, and then it split apart slowly. The snow girl grinned, laughing soundlessly. It seemed that she was quite satisfied with all this. I took my niece to the hot spring the night before, and one of my New Year's wishes was fulfilled. When we went to look at the stars in the middle of the night, the leader called out by the lakeside, "Do you want to lie down and watch the stars?" So my niece and I lay down obediently. The starry sky is indeed more attractive, but is also very cold. After a while, we got up from the cold and returned to the lakeside, and found the leader had a faint smile on his face, looking quite satisfied. End of this chapter. Chapter 478. When Jing Jiao came out, Yuan Qijing was by the well. The sword justice was not very tall, or at least not as tall as Lu Xi, but the cold and stern aura he exuded was frightening. The disciples of Aoyama were most afraid of Yuan Qijing. Of course, Jing Jiao was not afraid of him, but he didn't like to deal with him either, so he hadn't seen him for years. But after such a big event, they had to meet each other even if they didn't want to. So their reunion after so many years happened suddenly. Neither of them was mentally prepared, so they didn't know what to say. The forbidden cave residence of Shangda Peak was filled with a weird atmosphere. It was not until the inherited Heaven Sword came to the cave residence quietly that the atmosphere was slightly relieved. "Are you sure?" Lucy's voice came from the opening of the scabbard. It would be more convenient to use another method of voice transmission, and it wouldn't be as funny as the current scene, but it wasn't safe. Lucy had to make sure that no one could hear the conversation between the three of them today. Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly, "It's indeed the bloodline of the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom." Lucy's voice came from the scabbard again after a moment of silence. "What's her current level?" "Not as good as you two," Jing Jiao added for now. If he hadn't been sure that Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing were powerful enough to suppress the Snow Girl, he wouldn't have dared to take the risk of bringing the Snow Girl back to Aoyama, no matter how many ideas he had. The cave residence became quiet again, and it lasted for a long time. Then a sigh came from the scabbard. The sigh was as simple as a hum, but its meaning was complicated or profound. Of course, both Jing Jiao and Yuan Qijing could understand it. What Lu Xi wanted to say was, "Young senior uncle, you never went out before, but now you go out and cause trouble. You released the king of the underworld, killed the old dragon, messed up the Guoqing temple, and now you even brought back the descendant of the queen of the Snowy Kingdom. What on earth do you want? Do you want to see the end of Aoyama in our generation? Yuan Qijing snorted coldly and expressed the same opinion. The whole of Aoyama, and even the whole of Chaotian, knew that the sword justice of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing, didn't like the immortal Jingyang and would sneer disdainfully whenever this person was mentioned, not to mention that he was in front of them that day. As mentioned before, Jingjiu didn't like Yuan Qijing either. Why didn't the few great demons of the Snowy Kingdom move away from the sword jail in advance? Yuan Qijing was displeased. The notice was sent in such a hurry. It was already very urgent to arrange for the disciples to leave first. How could they have the time to care about other matters? Lu Ci's voice came from the scabbard. He quickly tried to smooth things over. Stop arguing. Let's talk about what we should do next. As the three most important figures in Aoyama, it was rare for them to gather together and discuss something seriously. In fact, there weren't many things in Chaotian that were worth their attention. The last time this happened was more than 300 years ago, when they were discussing how to deal with the problem of Master, Senior Brother. We cannot let anyone know that Yukheim is in Aoyama, Yuan Qijing went on, but those who should know about it must know it as soon as possible. Though these two statements seemed to contradict each other, they actually had a deeper meaning. Lu Ci uttered in agreement. Jingjiu didn't agree with this suggestion, but he couldn't deny it considering his low cultivation state. It's fine with Tong Yin. The nun is very obedient, he said. They should know what they should know as soon as possible, and they shouldn't know what they shouldn't know. The Zhongzhou school was of course the latter. This was the opinion of the Aoyama sect all along, so there was no need to explain it. In a nunnery hall of the 3,000 nunnery outside the Yuan city, Tong Yin pulled back her right hand, giving up the idea of breaking the formation. The formation formed by the longevity lamps in the nunnery hall looked peaceful and tranquil, but it was actually very powerful. He had no way to break it based on his current cultivation state. I didn't expect you to be so good at setting up the formation even though you can't cultivate. He said this while looking at the old nun outside the round window. Note, last time I wrote nun asterisk 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 asterisk, but it turned into an asterisk. I was quite speechless. The old nun smiled, and the wrinkles on her face deepened. You should have guessed who set up this formation, and I'm just a lamplighter, she said. Tong Yin stared into her eyes and said in a calm but slightly pressured tone, Aren't you worried that Jingjiu's actions will bring disaster to the human world? My lifespan is coming to an end. How can I care about what will happen to the human world? The old nun smiled and continued, My young master told me that you're good at chess, so you must be good at persuading people. So this is the last time I talk to you. Please forgive me. Having said that, she took down the lamp from the branch and walked toward the snowy lake. If Tong Yin were to strike now, she could kill her easily, but what would be the point? Looking at the back of the old nun heading toward the snowy lake, Jingjiu wondered why Jingjiu locked him up here. If it were for the sake of the green sky mirror, Jingjiu could simply snatch it and leave. It was because Jingjiu couldn't catch up with him, and he couldn't ask the masters on the Cloud Dream Mountain to ask for it. It was because of the Snow Girl. Jingjiu didn't want the outside world to know that the Snow Girl had gone to Aoyama. What would he do with the Snow Girl then? It was bone-piercing cold on the top of the Shangda Peak, and the ice and frost didn't melt all year round. The deep well leading to the sword jail looked like a black hole in the snowy ground. Usually, Yuan Qijing liked standing by the well and looking down at the bottom of it in silence, either recalling something or comprehending something. It was unclear whether it was because of the Snow Girl or Jingjiu, but he stood far away from the well today. After hearing what Jingjiu had to say, he asked sharply, Wang Xiaoming has seen the Snow Girl. What should we do with him? Lu Ci's voice rang out in the sheath. I'll see if I can kill him on my way back from White Town. Jingjiu said, The Sun Banner is a bit powerful, and he will be more cautious after this incident. It was quiet again for a long time in the Manor Cave. If the mysterious Dark Church released the news, the Zhongzhou school and the Kunlun sect would be able to guess that the snowman was the offspring of the queen of the Snowy Kingdom, and then they would find out that Jingjiu had brought him back to Aoyama. The cold and spring into Yuan City and the disciples of Aoyama were all behind closed doors. Anybody could tell that something was wrong. Lucy I suddenly said, "As long as we don't have any evidence, it doesn't matter even if we can guess it." "That's right," Yuan Qijing said sternly. "Whoever believes the words of this devil man of the deviant sex will be the enemy of the orthodox sections." Jing Jiu thought it was indeed the case. If Zhu Rizhui were by the side and heard this, he would be amazed, thinking that what she said sounded so reasonable even though it was illogical. Lucy I continued, "I'll go to White Town to inform Chao Yuan and Zen Master. Senior Master, you go to Zhaoga City to inform the Emperor." "What about me?" asked Yuan Qijing. Jing Jiu was in a bad mood when he thought that he would have to go out again. "What you have to do is the simplest and most important thing," he said. "You have to persuade the dead dog not to tell this to your master." What he said was obviously emotional. As Yuan Qijing was about to retort, he thought that his master had indeed escaped from Shangda Peak, so he had no choice but to remain silent. The disciples of Aoyama walked out of their manor caves along with the ringing of the bell, the buzzing of the swords, and the orders. The peaks that were as quiet as the graveyard had finally come back to life. On the stone beam between Shuriwa Peak and Shilai Peak, the fog had thinned and the dark figure had gradually revealed himself. The dark phoenix walked to the edge of the beam while spreading his beautiful wings and looking in the direction of Shangda Peak, saying discontentedly, "I can't believe he brought such a person back. When Little Fourth comes back, we have to kill Jing Jiu as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will all be killed because of him." On the top of Tianguang Peak, the inherited heaven sword flew back into the stone monument. The slight vibration made the round turtle open his eyes slowly, thinking that it was a good thing that he didn't come here. Though the principal guards knew what had happened, the disciples of Aoyama, the elders, and even the peak masters had no idea what had happened. The disciples of the peaks were discussing something in a low voice while looking at the sky, feeling bewildered. The female disciples of Qingrong Peak were even noisier. The whole peak was filled with their chatter, which could even be heard outside the peak. The sword of the universe landed on the top of Shinma Peak. Jing Jiu couldn't help but shake his head when he heard the noise on the other side, thinking that it was still the same after so many years. Zhao Leu walked over. Jing Jiu signaled her with his eyes that they would talk about it later. Gu Qing and Yuan Shu had guessed that what had happened that day must have something to do with their master or senior master, so they felt both nervous and excited at the same time. The white cat walked out from the manor cave noiselessly. The bell on his neck didn't make any sound. "Ada, nice to meet you," said Jing Jiu. The white cat came before Jing Jiu and rubbed against Jing Jiu's leg, his eyes full of resentment, as he thought that he wasn't good at all. When Jing Jiu was not in Aoyama, these little guys didn't want to talk to him because of what had happened in Guocheng Temple, and Leia didn't even want to hug him. Oh, and a little scoundrel dared to grab his tail. It was no different from bullying a cat. It was then that Ping Yongka came to the top of the cliff. Seeing Jing Jiu's face, Ping Yongka guessed that this was his master, feeling very nervous. He wanted to kneel down to greet Jing Jiu, but he didn't know which leg to bend first, so his movement was a bit slow. Jing Jiu didn't expect that there would be an outsider at the Shinma Peak, so he glanced at Gu Qing. Gu Qing knew that his master must have forgotten about him, so he said, "Brother Ping Yongka, come and greet your master." Ping Yongka hurried forward and kneeled down to greet Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu remembered who this child was, so he signaled him to get up calmly. Of course, no one could tell that he remembered because of Gu Qing's reminder. It had to be said that Gu Qing's ability in this aspect had reached the acme of perfection, and he was on the verge of reaching the acme of perfection. Knowing that Jing Jiu had come back, the apes cheered and applauded. But knowing that Jing Jiu didn't like it, they soon dispersed and didn't come to the top of the cliff. When the apes stopped crying, the neighing of horses came from the mountains in the distance. The Shima Peak was getting more and more lively, and there were more and more people. In this life, Jing Jiu's way of doing things hadn't changed, but his way of doing things had been adjusted. Starting from Lu Shui and Zhao Leu, he had been taking in disciples. Of course, he learned this from his senior brother. Therefore, he was very careful not to have people like Lu Xi, Yuan Qijing, or himself among the disciples of the Shenma Peak. But today, he suddenly realized that there were people with the surname Lu, Yuan, and himself on the Shenma Peak. Why did he feel a little unlucky? Chapter 479. The feeling grew stronger and stronger, striking at his Tao heart and making him feel very uncomfortable. Jingjiu knew that it was not because of the family names of Lu Shui and Yuan Chu, but because the snow girl was in Aoyama. After some thought, Jingjiu took out Cold Cicada and tossed it to the cat, saying, "Ada, you wear it first." Cold Cicada landed on the head of the white cat. No matter how high the position was, it would be able to get used to it after a long time, so it was not afraid of it. Thinking of the snow girl, Cold Cicada felt more satisfied. The white cat reached out his right paw and moved Cold Cicada to a more suitable position, feeling satisfied. He meowed at Jingjiu to express his gratitude. Jingjiu was also satisfied, thinking that the snow girl would follow the scent of Cold Cicada to Shenma Peak after she came out from behind closed doors. Ada would be able to defend himself then, and those three would be too embarrassed to let Ada suffer a mishap. Ping Yongka came close to Gu Qing and asked in a low voice, "Big brother, what is the background of this cat? Why does its name sound a bit strange?" Before Gu Qing could explain, Jingjiu asked Ping Yongka, "What sword style do you want to learn?" Ping Yongka was taken aback, thinking that since he was a disciple of Shenma Peak, he should learn the regretless sword style of the great master Jingyong. What other sword styles could he learn? Thinking of his own experience, Gu Qing said with a smile, "You can choose any of the sword styles of the 9 peaks of Aoyama." Ping Yongka was stunned speechless, wondering how it could be arranged this way. Gu Qing asked Jingjiu, "My young brother doesn't have a sword yet. Master, what's your plan?" It was then that a singing voice suddenly broke out on Qingrong Peak. Ping Yongka looked in that direction curiously. Jingjiu shot him a glance and said, "Learn the endless sword style of Qingrong Peak then. We'll talk about it later." Ping Yongka was taken aback again, but he felt innocent, thinking that he had merely taken a glance at the peak. "Master," he said, "Qingrong Peak is full of big sisters. It's so weird." Jingjiu ignored him and walked back into the cave. Not long after, he came out again with a thin sword manual in his hand. Ping Yongka did not know whether he should be happy or sad. He took over the sword book in confusion. Before he could say anything, he was dragged into the Taoist temple by Gu Qing and Yuan Chu. "Are you stupid?" During the Tao-seeking meeting in Cloud Dream Mountain, Martial Uncle attended it as a disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery. "What's so strange about that?" Yuan Chu looked at him and said angrily, thinking that if it was junior Martial's sister Yushan, she would be so happy, unlike you who was so picky. Gu Qing smiled but said nothing. He cooperated with Yuan Chu in dragging Ping Yongka into the Taoist temple, not because he was afraid that his master would be angry, but because he knew that the two masters wanted to speak. The bamboo chair was at the edge of the cliff, facing the sea of clouds. Jingjiu sat behind Zhao Leu, combing her hair. Thinking of the sword manual, Zhao Leu said, "You have a good memory." Jingjiu said, "I can still remember most of the powerful sword arts, but I have almost forgotten the introductory cultivation methods." He had discovered this problem when he came out from the mountain stream. The memory he had retained had nothing to do with the length of time. It was more like he had made a deliberate choice. He could remember most of the important things, so the things he could not remember should be trivial. Zhao Leu said, "I haven't seen you accumulating sand for a long time." "I've been busy," said Jingjiu. He was getting busier and busier. It was hard for him to find time to rest after cultivation, not to mention to kill time by accumulating sand. Counting carefully, he had spent so little time in Aoyama that it was hard to imagine in the past. Zhao Lei knew that he didn't like it, so she glanced at him sympathetically. Jingjiu said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm paying off a debt." Zhao Lei asked after some thought, "Is this the cause and effect?" Looking at the flowing sea of clouds outside the cliff, Jingjiu said after some thought, "I don't owe this world anything. Zhao Leu said, "The green grass on the hillside doesn't owe that horse." Jingju nodded, saying, "So I have to go to Zhaoga City next." "I'll go with you," said Zhao Leu. Jingjiu said, "Let Gu Qin go with you this time. He is familiar with the affairs in Zhaoga City." Zhao Leu said, "The situation in the snowland is calming down, and this year's plum meetings will be held as usual. Zhuo Ruzhui should be in Zhaoga City." Jingjiu said, "The event this time has something to do with the snowland." He intended to tell Zhao Leu about the snow girl, so that she could be prepared if something unexpected happened in the future. It was then that the white cat suddenly ran out from the manor cave. He was in a hurry, the bell on his neck ringing incessantly. Zhao Leu's expression changed a bit, wondering what had happened. The white cat put Cold Cicada on the ground, motioning for Jingjiu to take a look at it. Cold Cicada's entire body was stiff, a dozen of its thin, white limbs trembling. It seemed that it couldn't hold on any longer. Jingjiu reached out his hand to grab it, and found it was fine, but it was scared out of its wits. The mosquito controlled by Cold Cicada was dead. It died in that room in the sword jail. Jingjiu came to Shanghai Peak in the twilight. It was already late at night in the sword jail, just like any other time. He walked through the gloomy passageway, making no sound until he came to the hall illuminated by the lanterns. He looked at the narrower passageway on the right. The sword wheels of the formation of ceiling all by ice were hidden in the stone walls on both sides, leaving no trace behind. His line of sight passed through the seemingly empty air and landed on the cell at the end of the passageway. All of a sudden, a great deal of ice and snow gushed out from the crack of the cell door. More and more of the ice and snow gushed out at a faster and faster pace, until the ice and snow turned into a rushing river, heading toward Jingjiu with an unimaginably cold and dreadful energy. Jingjiu looked at the scene in front of him in silence, neither dodging nor feeling startled. The ice and snow gushing out from the cell arrived in front of Jingjiu almost instantly, and was on the verge of drowning him. It was then that Jingjiu closed his eyes and then opened them again. The ice and snow had disappeared. In front of his eyes was the same gloomy passageway. It was the same lonely cell. To imprison someone like the snow girl, Jingjiu had learned his lesson from his big brother's mistake, so he was more cautious this time. He had prepared a backup plan in advance. The mosquito in the fiend prison was left behind by Jingjiu to keep an eye on the snow girl. He didn't expect that it would be discovered by the snow girl so soon and then killed by her. It was the same as the illusion he had seen earlier. Was the snow girl demonstrating her powerful cultivation state, or was she expressing her anger? Jingjiu looked at the cell in silence, not uttering a single word for a long time. No sound could be heard in the cell either. It was as quiet as a graveyard. A gust of wind suddenly occurred in the grand hall, rolling up the dust. It was unclear whether the wind came from the other side of the well or the other side of the Hermit Peaks. "I'm going on a long journey," Jingjiu said while looking at the cell through the long passageway. "If you have anything to say it now." A faint moaning sound came out from the cell. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "Okay." A bamboo chair appeared in the cell. The bamboo chair was a bit old, and the surface and the armrests of the chair were very smooth. It was a bit unstable since it hadn't been repaired for many years. The scenes projected by the magic treasures on the walls of the cell had changed. They had changed from the blue sky, white clouds, and green water of Aoyama to a vast land and a world sealed in ice. In the distance of that world, a lonely and tall, icy peak was vaguely visible. The snow girl was wrapped in a quilt, squatting on the bamboo chair. She looked at the icy peak in satisfaction. The snow line didn't move southward this year, and the cold wind in the snowland wasn't as chilly as it had been a few years ago. Zhaoga City welcomed a normal spring. The green trees in the Zen temple were of different shades, looking like a new teapot. The fog rose and fell along with the terrain, looking like the white smoke on a teacup. The spring scene at the Net Perception Temple was indeed beautiful. A grand hall could be vaguely seen in the fog. Jingjiu walked out of the grand hall and came to the foggy forest. The spring scene looked even better now. The net perception temple was the royal Zen temple. Jingjiao had just finished talking with the emperor. He told the emperor about the snow girl being imprisoned in Aoyama and learned something about the recent situation in Zhaoga City. He didn't want to pay any attention to these mortal affairs, but he had to listen to the emperor since he was going to meet him. It was the same as when he didn't want to meet Yuan Qijing, but sometimes he had no choice but to meet him. Jing Xin had kept a low profile in the last few years, seldom leaving the manor. He had been studying and studying under the guidance of the teachers at Zhongzhou School in Yamatai every day, both openly and secretly. The situation in Zhaoga City was peaceful, but it wasn't good. Back then, some officials, like Governor Li of Dayuan City, had submitted a petition requesting Jing Yao to be the crown prince. But these officials had almost disappeared. The emperor had to rely on the officials in the imperial court to govern the world. Most of the officials and generals of the Jing imperial court had studied at Zhongzhou School or had studied at Yamatai. In comparison to Zhongzhou School and Yamatai, the Aoyama sect didn't have much influence in Zhaoga City. Back when Gu Qing entered the imperial palace and became the teacher of Jing Yao, the whole world was shocked. Everybody thought that the Aoyama sect intended to change the system of the Plum meeting and extend its influence to the north. The Zhongzhou school reacted strongly. They sent an important figure like Yu Qianmen to protect Prince Jing Xin. It wasn't until now that Xiang Wanshu and a few immortal masters of the Zhongzhou school were still guarding the Prince Jing Xin's manor house. The Zhongzhou school was especially furious after the incident at the Fiend prison, and the commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau changed his stance. Under the circumstances, it was almost impossible to depose Jing Xin and appoint Jing Yao as the crown prince. It was not a good thing that Zhaoga City was peaceful at the moment. Jingjiao walked to the edge of the pond and looked at the newly sprouted lotus leaves on the surface of the water, remaining silent for a long time. If the royal family of the Jing family wished to have a prosperous future, they had to pay attention to the opinions of the Zhongzhou school and Yamatai, unless the royal family of the Jing family and the Aoyama sect had the power to suppress all the opposing opinions. His disciple Gu Qing was the teacher of Jing Yao, and his nephew Jing Li was Jing Yao's study companion. In anyone's eyes, Jingjiao was the key figure for Aoyama to go north. So many things had happened, especially after the unicorn of the Guoqing temple fled in defeat. The Zhongzhou school must have suspected the relationship between Jingjiao and the emperor, and the incident at the Fiend prison and the death of the old dragon. Even if they didn't have any evidence, the Zhongzhou school would kill Jingjiao in secret if they had a chance. However, the Zhongzhou school had no idea that, according to the style of the Aoyama sect, if Jingjiao died, the Aoyama sect would retaliate crazily, regardless of whether they had the evidence or the chance. It seemed that the war between the two leading sects in the cultivation world was unavoidable. It was truly troublesome. Looking at the swaying lotus branches in the wind, Jingjiao was calculating the outcome of the war in silence. 2 in the heavenly arrival state against 2 in the heavenly arrival state. It was a mutual catastrophe. Yuan Qijing broke through the state a bit later, but he was so cunning that he must have some tricks up his sleeve. The unicorn's true body was also in the upper state of the heavenly arrival state. The devil rooster didn't know when to retreat when he went crazy, and Ada was not as cowardly as Jingjiao. All Jingjiao could do was count on the dead dog. There were a few more valley masters on the Cloud Dream Mountain than the peak masters of Aoyama. The Little Fourth had concealed his true power for so many years, so he should be able to kill 2 or 3 of them if he suddenly erupted. However, most of the people in the hermit peaks of Aoyama were dead, but it was different on the back mountain of the Cloud Dream Mountain. After Bai Run ascended and became a fairy lady, the Zhongzhou school didn't have any internal strife. It was highly likely that some elders of the previous generation were still alive there. Like the carp in the river of lava at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley, who could have thought that the Zhongzhou school had a divine animal hidden in such a desolate place? After a simple calculation, Jingjiao found it even more troublesome. If the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school started a war, it was no exaggeration to say that half of Chaotian would be destroyed, no matter who won in the end. How did things end up like this? Jing Jiu had no idea. He entered the fiend prison in the beginning because he wanted to learn something from the king of the underworld, so he didn't intend to disturb the old dragon. Later, he found out that it was because Bulo Lin sent a letter to the fiend prison through the palace of Prince Jing Xian. Bulo Lin was his big brother's. The answer was revealed. He had been winning over the years, whether it was in the Battle of the Snowland or in the turmoil of the Guocheng Temple. Yet, those were merely minor victories. What his big brother pursued was the overall situation. As long as Chao Tian was in turmoil and the people were killed, it would be his victory. Do you feel sad as well? The voice of a woman rang out behind Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu didn't turn around, saying, "I'm not sad. I just don't understand why the cultivation practitioners don't concentrate on their cultivation, but have so many thoughts." He couldn't figure it out in his previous life, and he still couldn't figure it out in this life. If the thoughts came from the sense of responsibility to lead his own race forward, where did the sense of responsibility come from? If the sense of responsibility came from the despair of the old world, shouldn't one lead the army of the underworld to attack the human world? If the reason for all this was love, wasn't it just a boring story that could only be told in the operas? The woman sat down by Jing Jiu and hugged her knees. Looking at the lotus branches in the pond, she sniffled a few times and wiped off the tears rolling down from her eyes. "There is nothing wrong in the world," she said bitterly. "It's the mediocre people who worry about nothing. Maybe it's because we are all mediocre people." Jing Jiu turned his head to look at her and said earnestly, "I'm not, and neither is he." Chapter 480. The eyes and brows of this young woman were a bit tender, but they were not really young, or they were born like Tong Yen. Instead, they were born because of the happiness brought by her lack of experience in life. Jing Jiu thought her face looked familiar. He remembered that he had met her when he sharpened the sword with the demon bone at the Jing house last year. She poured him a cup of overnight tea that had been brewed a long time ago. Soon, he remembered more things. This young woman seemed to be the granddaughter of the prime minister of the imperial court, and she had an affair with Li. As such, she should be his future wife. These matters were rather complicated, but Jing Jiu had soon finished thinking about them. He thought that this young woman was indeed lucky to have met him again, even though she was not very smart. It was easier for the young woman to recognize Jing Jiu. Seeing his face, she yelled pleasantly, "Uncle, why are you here?" The tear stains were still visible on her face as she spoke. The Net Perception Temple was the royal Zen temple, so it was normal for the family members of the Prime Minister to come here. Yet, a young woman of her age came here either to pray or to be grounded. It was evident that she was facing a difficult problem in her life. It was the same as the emperor's. Thinking of the attitude of the Prime Minister and those officials in the imperial court, Jing Jiu suddenly said, "I want to drink tea." After leaving the Net Perception Temple, Jing Jiu led Gu Qing to the Jing house. The eaves of Taichung Temple were covered in dust, which couldn't be blown away by the spring wind. And there hadn't been any spring rain lately, so it didn't have the magical power to attract people's attention. Jing Jiu didn't take a look in that direction, nor did he press the brick. He asked Gu Qing to knock on the door. The door was pushed open, revealing a young but steady face. As he saw Gu Qing, a pleasantly surprised expression showed on his face. "Teacher." Jing Li didn't go to the imperial palace that day. He was the study partner of the Prince Jing Yao, and he had been taught by Gu Qing for a long time. As such, he was Gu Qing's student as well. Gu Qing let out a smile without saying anything, letting Jing Jiu come out from behind him. Jing Li came back to his senses after being taken aback, and bowed to Jing Jiu hastily. His attitude toward Jing Jiu was obviously different from his attitude toward Gu Qing. That clear sense of distance seemed to not appear between family members. Jing Jiu was not displeased. Instead, he felt very comfortable. "Ask your father to come here," he said. According to his usual practice, he would usually not speak at this moment. At most, he would make a sound of acknowledgement. However, after all these years, he had learned that not everyone could be like Lu Shui, Zhao Liu, and Gu Qing, who could accurately understand him with just a look and a movement. For example, Yuan Shu was still lacking in this aspect. Instead of explaining further, it was better to make it clear from the beginning. The furnishings in the study were naturally the same as before. Jing Jiu subconsciously wanted to take out the bamboo chair and lie down, but he touched nothing. Then he remembered that the bamboo chair had been left for Xue Jie. He had no choice but to walk to the desk and sit down. His posture was somewhat stiff. Gu Qing boiled a pot of tea and brought it to Jing Jiu in separate cups. Though Jing Jiu didn't like tea, he had learned a thing or two about the quality of tea over the years. Looking at the clear and thick tea, he thought the tea was indeed much better than that of Liur's. The footsteps could be heard outside the window. Jing Shang had come back from Taichung Temple in a hurry after receiving the notice. He greeted Jing Jiu cautiously as he walked into the study room. The situation in the snowland had been alleviated, and the plum meeting resumed. The zither tournament had ended a few days ago, and the chess tournament was held that day. All of Zhaoga City was devoted to this event. Jing Shang had no job in Taichung Temple, so he was not as busy as the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau, but he still had to stay in the yamen. Looking at the white hair on his temples, Jing Jiu suddenly said, "I shouldn't have asked you to win money through the chess tournament of the plum meeting back then. It would have been much easier to give you a box of golden leaves." Jing Shang was taken aback, wondering why Jing Jiu suddenly brought up something that had happened a long time ago. Jing Jiu asked, "What do you think about the marriage of Li Er?" Jing Shang was even more startled, wondering why Jing Jiu would care about such a trivial matter. After some thought, he asked, "Well, what do you think about it? If you don't object, Li will marry her if she wants to." Jing Jiu said, "Gu Qing will take care of this matter. You two listen to him." Jing Shang looked at Gu Qing, his eyes full of helplessness, thinking that Jing Jiu didn't know the hidden trouble behind this matter. But Jing Jiu had to tell him. Gu Qing smiled and invited Jing Shang out of the study room. They came to a quiet corner in the back garden, and Gu Qing said earnestly while staring into Jing Shang's eyes, "Find a time to go to the manor of Prime Minister to propose the marriage." Jing Shang was so shocked that he couldn't utter a word, wondering what Jing Jiu meant. Gu Qing didn't explain and continued, "I heard that the son of State Duke Shan is going to propose the marriage in 8 days, so we have to go there earlier or on the same day. Which day do you think is more suitable? Now that you know that the manor of Prime Minister is going to establish a marriage alliance with the manor of State Duke Shan, why do you still want us to propose the marriage?" Jing Shang said with a bitter smile, "As far as I know, the young lady has been sent to the Net Perception Temple and is under house arrest, waiting to be married. The attitude of the manor of Prime Minister is already very clear." Gu Qing said, "Everything has to be fought for." Jing Shang sighed and said, "State Duke Shan has the background of Zhongzhou School, and these years he's been very close to Prince Jing Xian's manor. I am just an idle official of Taichung Temple. How can I compete with others?" Gu Qing smiled and said, "You have Duke Lu, His Majesty, and Aoyama behind you. You are qualified to compete with anyone." Returning to the study room, Gu Qing told him about Jing Shang's attitude and worries. He found that Jing Jiu was looking at himself in the mirror and didn't care about these things at all, so he couldn't help but stop talking. His master's relationship with the Imperial Palace was very secretive. Even now, no one knew the truth, but couldn't be hidden from the eyes of the world. If he forcefully interfered in the marriage between Li Gu and the young lady of the manor of Prime Minister, the Zhongzhou school would inevitably think that it was the attitude of His Majesty the Emperor and the provocation of Aoyama. He was afraid that there would be a lot of trouble. Jing Jiu put down the bronze mirror in his hand and said, "If this marriage can't go through, how can Jing Yao be the crown prince?" Gu Qing understood what his master meant. If this marriage could go through, the attitude of the prime minister would change, which would affect Yamatai's opinion. At least, those scholars would remain neutral, which in turn would affect those officials of the Imperial Academy and the Imperial Censorate in the Imperial Court. However, the problem was that, in order to go through with this marriage, the Prime Minister had to change his attitude, which meant that Yamatai had to change his opinion of Jing Yao, which was basically impossible. All of Chaotian was well aware that the hardest thing to change in the world was not the mantra of Aoyama or the surname of the Zhongzhou school, but the ideology of those scholars. I don't understand all this. All I know is that one has to pay the corresponding price to get something. For instance, if you want to buy something, you have to pay with gold leaves. Jing Jiu recalled that when he and Zhao Leo left Aoyama for the first time, they wanted to buy a conical hat, but didn't bring any money with them. You can also pay with silver, he said after a pause. Gu Qing listened attentively, as if what his master said was very sensible, and it was something he had never heard before. Jing Jiu continued, if you want to persuade Yamatai, you have to exchange something with them. Gu Qing couldn't help but ask, thinking that this was indeed a sensible idea, and everybody knew it. The question was, what could they use to change the opinion of the scholars of Yamatai? Wealth and honor were nothing to them, and so were the power and reputation. It was useless even if one exchanged the world for it. In the eyes of those scholars, their persistence was more important than the world. As the most outstanding disciple of Shinma Peak and the candidate for the sect master of Aoyama in the future, Gu Qing was fully aware that it was meaningless to discuss these issues with his master, so he had to solve them by himself. Should I go to the plum meeting to have a look? He asked. As the leader of the orthodox cultivation sects, the Aoyama sect would of course participate in the plum meeting. Gu Qing intended to remind Jing Jiu that the matter of the succession of the emperor was different from the matter of the Shinma Peak participating in the plum meeting alone. Okay, said Jing Jiu. Gu Qing said, the leader of the team is Zhuo Ruzhui. Should we ask him to participate in the meeting? Though Zhuo Ruzhui's status was lower, he was the personal disciple of the immortal sect master, so his status was special and important. Jing Jiu had admired Zhuo Ruzhui in the beginning, and it was even more so after the experience in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. He supported Gu Qing's suggestion, saying, let him stay awake on the day of the marriage proposal. Don't fall asleep. Gu Qing received the order and left the study room, closing the door behind him. Jing Jiu picked up the bronze mirror and looked at it again. After he had ascertained the location of the mirror, he dipped his right hand into the tea and started grinding it. It was still the same study room. The tea that day was much better than the stale tea last year, and the green sky mirror was better than the demon bone. As such, Jing Jiu felt much better. As such, he was in the mood to chat with someone. Are you going to stay inside and not come out? He was talking to Qing. After Jing Jiu locked the snow girl in the sword jail, Qing had returned to the green sky mirror and hadn't come out since. Jing Jiu continued, I've promised Tong Yan that I'll return the green sky mirror to him in a few days. But I feel it's a bit strange, and I'm wondering if I should change my mind. Qing flew out from the green sky mirror, flapping her transparent wings. How could you be so evil? She exclaimed while glaring at Jing Jiu angrily. After some thought, Jing Jiu said earnestly, I think I'm a good person. Gu Qing walked to the back garden. Thinking of his task, he felt heavy-hearted. Then, he thought of his master's temperament of not caring about anything, and couldn't help but feel envious, thinking that the cultivation practitioners should be like his master, living like a ferryman no matter how high their cultivation state was, whether they were standing, sitting, or lying down. Unfortunately, he couldn't learn it. The high platform in the new plum garden, which looked like leaves and flowers, was hidden in the clouds and fog. It looked like a fairy realm, but not many people were there that day. The participants of the plum meeting had all gone to the chessboard mountain to watch the chess tournament. Gu Qing didn't go to the chess tournament because it was Kane Nyang who had won anyway, and he believed that Zhuo Ruzhui wouldn't go there either. He went to the immortal residence of the Aoyama sect and found that Zhuo Ruzhui was there as expected. He wasn't sleeping, but was nurturing his sword. A faint but pure fog came out from the top of his head, and a flying sword of the fairy state was rotating slowly inside it. Standing outside the window and looking at the scene, Gu Qing couldn't help but sigh in his mind. Zhuo Ruzhui always looked lazy in front of others, but he cultivated diligently behind others' backs. He had the natural Dao quality, so why did he have to be lazy? It was said that he was very similar to his master, but it looked like there was a gap between them. His master was truly lazy. Sensing Jing Jiu's arrival, Zhuo Ruzhui opened his eyes and put away his flying sword, feeling a bit strange. When he nurtured his sword through meditation, he would set up a formation using the inherited heaven sword style. But why could Gu Qing come to the window so easily? Recalling the rumor, Zhuo Ruzhui asked, "Did you really learn the inherited heaven sword?" "Yes, big brother." Except for this statement, Gu Qing didn't explain further. Thinking of the relationship between Jing Jiao and his master, Zhuo Ruzhui thought of something else. He stood up and asked, "Why did you come to Zhaoga City?" "My master is here," said Gu Qing. "He wants to invite you over." Feeling surprised, Zhuo Ruzhui said, "Okay." Gu Qing didn't take him to the Jing house right away. Instead, he thought of something else. He went to the mountain residence of the disciples of Yamatai. It was a coincidence that the person he was looking for didn't like watching chess games. The scholars of Yamatai were good at calligraphy and playing chess, but Shi Yun liked reading books or writing books. He was a student of Bu Qiuxiao. He had performed outstandingly in the Dao competition of the Green Sky Mirror and was thought highly of by the seniors in the Orthodox cultivation circle. He would probably become the next housemaster in the future. Of course, the statuses of Zhuo Ruzhui and Gu Qing were quite high, and Zhuo Ruzhui and Gu Qing had died in the illusionary realm of the Green Sky Mirror one after the other for attempting to assassinate Bai Qianjun. As such, the two of them had a friendly conversation until Gu Qing said that. Shi Yun arched his eyebrows slightly and said, "You want me to be the teacher of Prince Jing Yao? Do you intend to humiliate me, cultivationist Gu Qing?" Gu Qing said calmly, "I remember that there's a saying in Yamatai that one should be taught regardless of his background." Shi Yun said while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes in silence, "But he is not one of us." End of this chapter. Chapter 481. The wind of early spring brought the fog into the mountain residence. The cheers could be heard in the distant mountains. It seemed that King Yang had won again. In comparison to the hustle and bustle in other places, the quietness here was depressing. Zhuo Ruzhui thought it had nothing to do with him, so don't look at me. As he was thinking of this, Shi Yun turned around and asked Jing Jiao, "In fact, I don't understand. Is this the intention of Shinma Peak or of Aoyama?" Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his head and glanced at Gu Qing, wondering why Gu Qing called him here. Then he thought of the relationship between his master and Jing Jiao again, his eyelids drooping. "What's the difference?" he asked feebly. Shi Yun said, "I have no choice but to see you out then." In the eyes of the scholars of Yamatai, letting the son of a vixen become the emperor was something that couldn't be discussed. We're just disciples of the younger generation, so we're not qualified to discuss this matter. We're just talking about it casually. But Gu Qing said with a faint smile, "Mr. Shi, could you introduce me to the Prime Minister?" "I haven't met Big Brother," Shi Yun said icily. "The disciples of Yamatai won't interfere in the affairs of the imperial court before they become officials." The Prime Minister Tsin had studied in Yamatai, so he was indeed Shi Yun's big brother in a sense. Gu Qing said, "You misunderstood me. It's a private matter." Shi Yun said, "Then I can't help you even if I wanted to." Gu Qing said with a faint smile, "Well, your sect has a new disciple named Xiaolu. Can I bring him to meet a senior?" Shi Yun stared at Jing Jiao intently and walked out without saying anything. It didn't take long before a young scholar arrived. Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his drooping eyelids. He was so surprised that he almost laughed out when he saw the dark face and the long robe that didn't match him no matter how he looked at it. Zhaoga City forbade the cultivation practitioners from riding the swords at will, so the Pure Heaven Bureau arranged a carriage for the three immortal masters. After making sure that there was no one around the carriage, Zhuo Ruzhui could not help but speak. He looked at the young scholar and said, "Are you planning to visit all the sects in the world? When are you going to become a nun at the Shuai Nunnery?" This young scholar who wore a long gown, but still looked like a farmer, was naturally Lu Shui. Logically speaking, he should still be imprisoned in Aoyama's sword jail. However, the entire Aoyama knew that he had already been released. No matter how angry Fang Jingtian was, there was nothing he could do. Tingguang Peak didn't care, and Yuan Qijing didn't agree. who could enter the sword jail to check if he was still there. Though what Zhuo said was sarcastic, it was actually true. After leaving Aoyama, Lu Shisui went to Bulo Lin, learned the sword style of the Western Sea Sword School, and listened to the scripts in the Guochang Temple for many years. Now he went to Yamatai to study. It was an unimaginable experience. Lu Shisui didn't pay attention to him. He asked Gu Qing, "What is young master doing in Zhaoga City?" Gu Qing knew that he wanted to ask more than that, and he was also concerned about Jing Jio's recent situation. They were well aware that Jing Jio was never one to exchange pleasantries, so Gu Qing had to do the talking. The chief caretaker of Shima Peak was indeed busy. Though it was Jing Jio who decided that Lu Shisui would go to Yamatai, he was in charge of all the specific arrangements, including the finishing touches of the vegetable garden outside the Guochang Temple. Even the inn by the entrance of the 1,000-mile windy corridor where Xiao He stayed was chosen by him. Gu Qing told him everything he knew and could say in the last 2 years. Lu Shisui listened attentively, analyzing what he could do. Zhuo felt bored listening to him. He rolled his eyes and turned over to sleep. The green sky mirror was placed on the shelf in silence, bringing some changes to this seemingly eternal study room. If Zhao Liu and Bai Zhao came to this room again, would they look at the mirror? Master, it doesn't make sense. Thinking of Shi Yun's attitude earlier, Gu Qing felt even gloomier. If he couldn't persuade Yamatai to change his attitude, this marriage would be hopeless. Then we'll just snatch it. Zhuo said it, as if it was a matter of course. Jing Jio thought it was reasonable, but it was easier to snatch the bride than to snatch the throne. He waved his hand to signal for them to go ahead with their business. Gu Qing led Zhuo to find Jing Shang, and then they went to Duke Lu's manor to discuss the business. Jing Jio and Lu Shisui were the only ones left in the study room. Though they hadn't seen each other for a year or two, they still didn't exchange pleasantries. Jing Jio used his piercing discernment to inspect Lu Shisui's meridians. After he was certain that the conflict of Jinshi had been largely resolved, he didn't pay any more attention to him. Lu Shisui was used to such an indifferent meeting after a long time. He reported what he had experienced during this period of time proactively. The situation in Zhaoga City was very complicated, and it was clear that the Aoyama sect couldn't persuade the Zhongzhou school, so they had no choice but to start with Yamatai. Jingzhou hoped that he could be of some help. In the end, he said, maybe it's because of the 2 letters written by the immortal sect master and the Zen master. The house master has treated me very well and taught me the righteous energy personally. As a result, many hidden dangers in my body have been resolved. This person is not bad, said Jingzhou. Lu Shisui said after a moment of hesitation, but it seems that he has already known about it. He had only told Jingzhou about it. Back when he was in Bulo Lin, there was an old scholar named Yamatai who took good care of Jingzhou. In the end, Jingzhou died in order to save Jingzhou from the sword of Shiwang Sunday. Before his death, the old scholar gave Jingzhou the pen of the city guard, the treasure of Yamatai, which had been lost many years ago. Based on Bu Xiaoxiao's ability and Yamatai's influence in the imperial court, he would be able to find out something through those obscure clues. It was for this reason that Lu Shisui didn't want to go to Yamatai a few years ago. It seemed that he was still suspected. I've investigated Bu Xiaoxiao. Recalling Qing Er's evaluation of him and his own answer, Jingzhou said, he's a truly good person. Lu Shisui remained silent, wondering why the old scholar was forced to betray Yamatai and live incognito in Bulo Lin if Bu Xiaoxiao was truly a good person. Jingzhou continued, so you don't have to be afraid. Like I told you last time, it will be fine as long as you don't cause any trouble. Lu Shisui glanced at Jingzhou cautiously and said, well, actually, I found something. Jingzhou looked at Jingzhou in silence. His expression didn't change, but he felt a bit helpless. Lu Shisui and Zhao Liu were the first 2 people he had brought with him in this life, but they were both troublemakers. Zhao Liu was a bit better. She was becoming more and more like Jingzhou, only staying behind closed doors at the Shima Peak. But Lu Shui was becoming more and more like his big brother. No matter what kind of situation he was in, he was still as enthusiastic as ever. That was the secret of other sections. Why did Jing Jiu have to investigate it? Even if that old scholar had done you a favor, well, it was still necessary to investigate it. What did you find? Jing Jiu asked. Lu Shui said, Teacher Yin was the student of the former housemaster. He had a high cultivation state and a high reputation. His status in the house was similar to that of senior uncle sword justice in Aoyama. Decades ago, he suddenly claimed that Buqiu had done something wrong and demanded him to abdicate. No matter how the other teachers in the house tried to persuade him, he refused to do so. Jing Jiu asked, was it in line with his temperament? Teacher Yin was famous for his stubbornness. He had a nickname in the house, Teacher Stubbornness. Lu Shui thought that even though that old man had gone to Bulo Lin, he was still doing good deeds. It was true that he was stubborn. What was the result? Jing Jiu asked. Lu Shui said, of course Buqiu didn't abdicate. He demanded that Teacher Yin announce his crimes in public. But Teacher Yin ran away with the pen of the guardianship. Jing Jiu asked, was he worried that he would be silenced? Lu Shui said, I've checked the daily records of the house at that time. This incident caused a lot of discussion. It wasn't easy for Buqiu to kill him quietly, and if he died, people would definitely suspect Buqiu. No matter how you looked at it, he was safe. He shouldn't have made such a choice. Since the scholar Yin had run away with the treasure of the house, nobody would believe his accusation against Buqiu. Jing Jiu could guess what the scholars in Yamatai were thinking at that time. And then? He asked. Lu Shui said, he passed through the 1,000-mile wind corridor by force and broke the saint's heart. He was severely injured and his cultivation state dropped a lot. Somehow, he ended up in Bulo Lin. Jing Jiu said, you've indeed found out a lot. Lu Shui appeared to be an honest person, and he was in fact an honest person. But he was also a smart person, especially when he was in Bulo Lin and was taught by Shiwang's son for a long time. As such, he was well aware of how to find out the truth of a matter without being discovered. Yet, what baffled him was that he had always thought that the scholar Yin who had betrayed Yamatai was a good person, and that the master of Yamatai, Buqiu, was a hypocrite who had concealed his true nature deeply. But it seemed that the current result was not enough for him to make such a judgment. What secret did the scholar Yin know about Buqiu that made him think that Buqiu would rather be suspected by others and kill him? If that secret was real, why hadn't any relevant information about him been leaked out from Chao Tian, even though he had been hiding in Bulo Lin for so many years? And why hadn't anybody known that he had been killed by Shiwang's son? This was the question on Lu Shui's mind, as well as Jing Jiu's. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiu suddenly asked, how much of the daily log can you remember? I can only remember the log for the last 100 years, replied Lu Shui. The scholars of Yamatai cultivated the orthodox energy and cultivated the sages' hearts, and they pursued the idea that there was nothing they couldn't tell others. The daily log of the house could be read by the students of the house at will, but couldn't be shared with outsiders. The daily log of the house was recorded in great detail. It was unclear what had happened in the last 100 years, but Lu Shui could remember all of it. Yet, he was still not satisfied with himself. It's true that it's not enough. Tell me about it first. Jing Jiu took down the green sky mirror from the bookshelf. Lu Shui began to recite the daily log from 100 years ago. Jing Jiu didn't have the patience to listen to all of the daily log, which was as vast as the ocean. He would make a judgment after listening to a few words of each log. He tapped the green sky mirror lightly to signal for Jing Jiu to skip it. In the 97th year, the cottage was renovated. 3 bundles of bamboo slips from the ancient times were found under the pavilion. In the 95th year, the Empress Yuan went to the mausoleum. The housemaster brought 3 disciples to Zhaoga City and gave them a handwritten copy of the Song of Righteousness by Zhenren of the Zhongzhou school. In the 84th year, the tranquil lake of the wind corridor overflowed, and the fertile land in the east of Hebei province was flooded. The disciples of the house formed a formation to block the water, and many people were killed or wounded. The total number of casualties was, looking at the sky outside the window, Jingjiu found that it would take him a few days to finish listening to the log, even if he continued to listen to it. He said to Lu Shui, 10 years before the scholar Yin fled, no, 3 years before Bu Qiuxiao was appointed as the next housemaster. Lu Shui thought it should be 54 years ago. He said, the former housemaster distributed the bamboo slips to the students of the house in the cottage that year. Bu Qiuxiao received 10 bamboo slips, which caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Jingjiu tapped the green sky mirror once. The voice of Lu Shui rang out in the study room incessantly. The green sky mirror let out a crisp sound once in a while, like an accompaniment. 49 years ago, Bu Qiuxiao became the housemaster. He led 40 scholars to the north, where they drew amulets in the magic army for 3 years. 47 years ago, the grand priest of the underworld rode the demons to attack the 1,000-mile wind corridor. Bu Qiuxiao was wounded while trying to save a few mortals. The demon blood was as black as ink by the tranquil lake. 45 years ago, the scholar Yin left Yamatai with the pen of the guard city. 40 years ago, stop. Let's go back to 47 years ago. Jingjiu asked, did the log say where the ink-like demon blood came from? No, Lu Shui said while shaking his head. The log only mentioned that the huge demon was intermittently visible in the tranquil lake with a long and thin neck. Where was Bu Qiuxiao 27 years ago? He hosted the plum meeting in Zhaoga City. In the autumn of that year, after the plum meeting, he traveled in the world for more than 20 days before returning to Yamatai. Jingjiu didn't ask any more questions. He looked at the tea in the teacup while rubbing the green sky mirror with his fingers. It was unclear what he was thinking. Lu Shui knew that his young master must have discovered some secret from the log, feeling nervous. I have a secret as well. There was a doctor named Jiang Rue among the spies. He deceived Nurse Huang's feelings, and then he was tortured by Su Lu in the 7th group for many years, living a miserable life. There was a free-traveling practitioner named Jiang Rue on the path. He deceived He Zhan's feelings, and then he was tortured to death by the eunuchs of Zhao Zhao. After he came out of the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, he was brought to the snowland by Sensei and killed in secret. It was a world of ice and snow. Some readers still remember that Jiang Rue was a good friend of mine in real life, and he was indeed a doctor. He also had a secret, which was that he had started to write a book again. I liked reading Ling Ran, a highly achieved doctor, so I recommended him to read it. Unexpectedly, he had the desire to write again when he was on duty every day. He wrote a book titled The Live Broadcasting Room of the Surgery. Unexpectedly, it was published on the shelves, and the number of subscribers was quite high. Even Haidang was reading it every day. After I read it, I found that it was indeed the case. I suddenly felt proud of myself. The medical stories in this book are not bad, and some of them are indeed interesting. It's because he is a competent doctor, but he is not a good friend. It's because he doesn't drink a drop of alcohol. His stories are getting better and better. Please read it carefully. If you like it, you will enjoy it. End of this chapter. Chapter 482. There were some lines on the surface of the green sky mirror, but they were very thin. There were some lines on the fingertips as well, but they were even thinner. As such, when his fingers rubbed the green sky mirror slowly, it didn't make any sound. The study room was as quiet as it had been in the past decades. Time passed slowly. Jingjiu didn't say anything while looking at the tea in the teacup. It was unclear what kind of amazing secret he was calculating. Lu Shui grew more and more nervous, feeling thirsty. He picked up the teacup reflexively and drank up the tea in one gulp. Then he realized he had done something wrong. Holding the teacup tightly, he turned around stealthily and walked to the stove, starting to boil the tea. During this process, Jingjiu's gaze didn't change at all. indicating that he wasn't looking at the tea in the teacup. The water in the teapot was boiling, making a bewildered sound. Lu Shui put the teacup in front of Jingjiu and stepped aside, not daring to disturb him further. The new tea buds grew slowly in the teacup, but the expression on Jingjiu's face didn't show any sign of relaxing. The records in the daily log, those seemingly unrelated events, those seemingly ordinary words, seemed to have some sort of secret connection between them. The connection was like the tiny bubbles in the tea, appearing at any moment and then disappearing for some unknown reason. It was hard to detect. The devil blood was as black as ink. The inky snake. The snake bones. The bones could be used to soak the wine. A flash of sword light appeared in the deep end of Jingjiu's eyes, which was bright and extremely sharp. After being wounded severely by the godly swordsmen of West Ocean, Jingjiu and Guodong traveled in Chaotian for 3 years, spending more than 10 spring, summer, autumn, and winter seasons together. They had seen many sceneries and talked a great deal. He didn't like to listen to her reasoning, and she knew it better than anybody else. As such, she didn't talk about her grand plan or her worries and plans for the future of the cultivation circle and the human race. Most of the things she talked about were trivial matters in life. The trivial matters in life were the family affairs. The only family member Guodong had in this world was her nephew, Hejan. Jingjiu could easily guess who Hejan's birth mother was. There were 3 people in the Shuiyu nunnery who had the highest seniority. Guodong, the chief nun, and the great grandmaster sounded very experienced, but they were in fact the youngest ones. The small green curtained sedan could fly on its own, bringing Jingjiu from the Guoqing temple to the Shuiyu nunnery. Many people had heard the Grand Supreme Elder speak, but no one had lifted the green curtain and seen her speak with their own eyes. The sound-transmitting magic treasure could do this. It was even possible that Shuiyu nunnery was sitting in the palanquin most of the time. In the cultivation world, Hejan was most famous for his luck. As a free-traveling practitioner without any background, he had encountered treasures one after another. His life was even more exaggerated than Wang Xiaoming's arranged life. It seemed that Guodong was not the only reason for his luck today. Guodong should still be in the cocoon of the natural worm silk at the time. It was impossible for her to arrange every step so well. However, there was no evidence for these inferences, and they seemed to be meaningless. Even if they were true, they couldn't form a complete story. Jingjiu didn't care much about it, letting his thoughts wander. As time passed, the hot tea in the teacup grew cold again. Lu Shui took the teacup away and brought a new one. The hot steam in the teacup drifted up, falling and dispersing on the surface of the green sky mirror, making the boundary between reality and illusion even more blurry. Jingjiu's line of sight left the teacup and landed on the surface of the green sky mirror along with the steam. In that world, he saw a small river, a boat with black awning, a stone bridge, a nunnery, and an infant. A scholar was leaving in the distant field, and he would stop once in a while to look back. Jingjiu had a general idea of what was going on, and he knew that this was the content of the story, but he didn't have any evidence yet. If he wanted to investigate it, he should be able to find out the truth, but of course he wouldn't do it. All he needed was this story, but he didn't need any evidence. It was because he didn't intend to convince the characters in the story, but only himself. Jingjiu felt a bit tired. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of the tea, finding it a bit cold. No matter how diligent Lu Shui was, he couldn't ensure that the tea in the teacup would always be hot. It had nothing to do with his concentration. He looked up at the outside of the window and found it was a bit dark. Only then did he realize that he had calculated for such a long time. "Young master," Lu Shui called out nervously. Jingjiu said, "That's enough. You can go back now." Lu Shui thought that Jingjiu didn't intend to share that secret with him. Jingjiu didn't have the habit of sharing secrets with him, and he was not Zhao Liu. "Are you going to represent Yamatai at the plum meeting?" he asked. Lu Shui said embarrassedly, "I haven't participated in it before, so I'm curious." "The cultivation tournament?" asked Jingjiu. Lu Shui felt even more embarrassed, saying, I don't know anything about zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting. All I know is fighting. Even though he represented Yamatsui, Lu Shui was still a disciple of Aoyama, so it was natural that he didn't know anything about zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting, and was good at the cultivation tournament. Jing Jiu understood this well, saying, Shi Yun is not bad. You can learn more from him. Lu Shui didn't expect his young master to have such a high evaluation of Shi Yun, feeling surprised. Jing Jiu explained, the scholars of Yamatsui are different from those poor scholars in the mortal world. They're true scholars. Just like the monks of the Guochang Temple were different from those fake monks who cheated money in the mortal world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed Lu Shui to study in these two places. Lu Shui asked, what else does my young master want me to do? Jing Jiu looked at the night sky outside the window, knowing that Gu Qing, Zhu Ruzhui, and Jing Shan were discussing that matter in the manner of Duke Lu. After a moment of thought, he said, help me send a letter to Bu Qiu Xiao. I want to meet him. Lu Shui was surprised, asking when. Thinking of the day of the marriage proposal, Jing Jiu said, you have to come within 8 days. If others had heard his request, they would have been shocked speechless. Even if you were the reincarnated disciple of the immortal Jingyang and an elder of the Shinma Peak, what qualification did you have to have the house master of Yamatsui come to see you? Lu Shui didn't think so he agreed. 8 days passed quickly. There were no lanterns or streamers in the manor of Prime Minister, and even the courtyard was swept clean. There was no dust on the trees or on the road, as if they were ready to receive the imperial edict. Today was the day when the manor of Duke Shan came to propose marriage. The procedures before the marriage proposal had been completed, and the 7th young lady, Xin Shi, had been brought back from the Net Perception Temple yesterday. Everything was ready, and the whole manor was full of joy. It was a happy event to marry off the naughty and stubborn 7th young lady, who refused to get married. More importantly, Prime Minister Xin had made a decision, so the people in the manor didn't have to bear the pressure from all sides. The wife of Prince Duke, Lu, returned to the manor early. Seeing the joy on the faces of her sisters-in-law, she felt a little uncomfortable. Duke Lu was on the side of Prince Jingyao, and the Prime Minister was from Yamatsui, but most of her relatives were from Zhongzhou School. It was really difficult for her to be in the middle. Besides, the 7th young lady didn't want to marry the son of Duke Shan at all. Was it appropriate for them to be so happy? Thinking of these things, the wife of Prince Shan went to Xin Shi's room and found that there were no traces of tears on her face, and there was even some joy in her eyes. She couldn't help but be surprised. The 7th young lady stopped making trouble, and the madams, servant girls, and servants all felt relieved, but she felt that something was wrong. After exchanging a few words with Xin Shi, she quietly left the back garden and found Lu Ming. She described Xin Shi's situation in a low voice and asked worriedly, will something happen today? Lu Ming looked at her and said with a smile, don't worry. Even if something happens, it will be a happy event. Hearing this, the wife didn't feel relieved. On the contrary, she felt it was even stranger. Lu Ming smiled awkwardly and said, it's about to start. I'll go to the front to take a look. Having said this, he quickly left and went to the front hall, thinking that it would be a pity to miss this big show. The hall was full of guests. Prime Minister Xin and Duke Shan stood side by side on the stage with a satisfied smile on their faces. Lu Ming looked at the handsome young master behind Duke Shan and thought that his appearance wasn't worse than Brother Li Er's, but he was afraid that today's show wouldn't be easy to sing. According to etiquette, the two sides had to greet each other. The guests looked at the scene with a smile, waiting for the ceremony to be completed in the next moment, and then hurried forward to congratulate them. At this moment, a sudden noise came from outside the Prime Minister's manor. The guests were shocked and looked out of the manor, wondering where the arrogant people had come from and dared to make trouble in front of the Prime Minister's door. The stewards and guards of the Prime Minister's manor retreated in fear, not daring to stop them. A group of people broke into the Prime Minister's manor. Walking in the front was Duke Lu. Who dared to hit him? I originally wanted to write. I object. But then I remembered that Chun Chong Sheng had already shouted in the story of choosing heaven. What a pity, what a pity. I like these kinds of scenes. Also, some readers might not have seen the sentence I added yesterday, so I'm very embarrassed to say it again. My friend wrote the surgery live broadcast room. When I wrote it yesterday, I was a bit smug and actually wrote the wrong name. But I'll take this opportunity to announce it to the public. Do you see, this is a true friend. Also, the title of today's chapter is very good. Also, I know that today and tomorrow I will be scolded by all of you for being a dog with broken chapters, but I had no choice. I took my niece skiing and couldn't write for these 2 days. These 2 chapters were written last night until 2 o'clock. Chapter 483. Seeing Duke Liu barge in with a group of people, the guests were startled, wondering what was going on. Some of them thought that Duke Liu and Prime Minister Sun were relatives by marriage, and they lived next to each other. But he wasn't invited by Prime Minister Sun today. Did something happen between the 2 manners? Many gazes fell on Lu Ming and his wife reflexively. Lu Ming had already approached them, pretending to be surprised. "Father, I thought you were in poor health. Why did you come all of a sudden?" His wife's panic was real, as she said in a trembling voice, "Grandpa, what are you? Duke Liu waved his hand to signal for Lu Ming to step aside, because it was unnecessary to do so today. Then he smiled amiably at his daughter-in-law, saying, "Nothing. I'm here to catch up with your father." Having said that, he walked toward the front of the courtyard. The guests made way for him hastily, bowing to him hastily, not daring to show any neglect. Duke Liu had kept a low profile before, but he couldn't keep a low profile after so many years, especially after being forced by Jing Jiao to do so many things. Everybody knew that he was undoubtedly the most favored person by the emperor. Seeing the approaching group, Prime Minister Sun knew that the official by Duke Liu's side was Jing Shang, and the young man behind Jing Shang, who looked pleasing to the eye, was Jing Li. He took a deep breath to suppress his anger, and asked sharply while looking at Duke Liu, "State Duke, why have you come all of a sudden today?" Duke Liu pretended to be displeased, saying, "We are relatives by marriage. You are going to marry your granddaughter. How can I not come? It's rude of you not to invite me, but I don't blame you." Prime Minister Sun retorted expressionlessly, "Don't you know why I didn't invite you?" He pointed to Jing Shang and said, "Even if you have a reason to come, what about Master Jing? What do you bring him here for? To investigate a case at Taichung Temple?" By the end of his statement, his voice had gotten higher, indicating that he was extremely angry. "I was going to say that it's rude of you not to invite him since our 3 families are neighbors, but you know why he is here. Come on, say it yourself." Having said this, State Duke Liu let Jing Shang get out of the way. Many years ago, Jing Jiao had appeared out of nowhere. Under the deliberate flattery and arrangement of certain people, the Jing residence had undergone an expansion and was officially connected to Duke Liu in the Prime Minister's manor. It was at that time that Jing Li met Censure by the courtyard wall when they were still little kids. The guests might not know about these things, but how could the 3 families not know? Prime Minister Sun stared into Jing Shang's eyes and said, "Lord Jing, do you really want to force people against their will?" Hearing these words, the entire place fell silent. One of the guests was very surprised and asked in a low voice, "Isn't this Lord Jing of Taichung Temple?" "Prime Minister, why?" Several contemptuous gazes fell on him. An official sneered and said, "You don't know who Lord Jing's younger brother is? The Jing family can be neighbors with the Prime Minister's residence and the High Duke's public house. Don't you think about why?" After the Plum meeting a few hundred years ago, the Jing imperial court had become the bridge connecting the cultivation circle and the human world. Though the populace didn't know who Jing Jiao was, the chancellors of Zhaoga City were well aware of it. It was widely acknowledged that Jing Jiao was the strongest swordsman among the young cultivation practitioners, and he was a sword pointed at Zhaoga City by Aoyama. However, State Duke Shan proposed marriage to the Prime Minister's manor that day. Why did Duke Liu and Jing Shang come here? Jing Shang sighed. This lowly official doesn't dare make things difficult for Prime Minister. I'm just doing my duty as a parent. Prime Minister Sun knew Jing Shang's background better than anybody else. If it were in the past, the Jing family would be a good candidate for marriage. However, as the leader of the civil officials who opposed Jing Yao's succession, how could he marry his granddaughter to Jing Yao's study partner, Jing Li, who had the background of the Aoyama sect? To say nothing of the fact that Jing Jiao was merely an elder of the Shinma peak. Even if he were the sect master of the Aoyama sect, Prime Minister Sun wouldn't agree to this marriage. He would even oppose it more firmly. State Duke Shan took 2 steps forward and demanded expressionlessly, "What do you two want to do? Do you oppose this marriage?" "No," Jing Shang said. "I just want to propose marriage to the 7th mistress of the manor of Prime Minister on behalf of my son." Duke Liu remarked sentimentally, "Jing Li and the 7th mistress have known each other since they were little. They are innocent and affectionate toward each other. Prime Minister, why do you have to interfere?" Though he spoke to the Prime Minister, his line of sight was fixed on State Duke Shan's face. State Duke Shan was extremely angry, thinking that this old man was too much of a bully. "I'd like to see who dares interfere with this marriage," he yelled sternly. State Duke Shan had been a disciple of the external department of the Zhongzhou school for 3 generations. He had a great deal of power in the military in his generation. Though he was not as favored by the emperor as Duke Liu, he was not afraid of him. Some officials reacted quickly, thinking that this marriage could make Duke Liu, who had always kept a low profile, come to the imperial palace to kill him. As expected, Duke Liu didn't bother arguing with State Duke Shan. He took out an imperial edict from his sleeve and said to the Prime Minister calmly, "Prime Minister, please accept the imperial edict." There was an uproar in the manor of Prime Minister, and then it became deathly quiet. Looking at the tidy courtyard and the candles and incense that had been prepared to offer sacrifices to heaven, Prime Minister Qin curled up the corners of his mouth, letting out a self-mocking smile. But he had no intention of kneeling down. Duke Liu's heart skipped a beat. He had no time to think too much about it, and started reading the imperial edict. A great number of people knelt down in the courtyard, but a few were still standing, including Prime Minister Qin. As many people had expected, the imperial edict of the emperor was very clear. It was to appoint a marriage for Jing Li and Sun Shi. After reading the imperial edict, Duke Liu handed it to the Prime Minister, reminding him again, "Old Sun, why don't you accept the imperial edict?" Prime Minister Qin looked at Duke Liu in silence with his hands folded behind his back, saying, "I've married my favorite daughter to Lu Ming, who was the most stubborn one in your manor at the time. I've always thought it was because I had a good judgment, and it was also because you had taught her well. Our families are in-laws by marriage. What do you mean by this? Do you intend to force me?" Duke Liu remained silent. The whole of Chaotian knew that the emperor had intended to appoint the 2nd Prince Jing Yao as the crown prince, but he was opposed by the civil and military officials led by the Prime Minister. The imperial edict of appointing the 2nd prince to be the crown prince must have some other meaning. It was deathly quiet in the courtyard, and the atmosphere was exceedingly tense. Taking a deep breath, Prime Minister Qin said, "Even though the emperor has appointed the marriage, I still won't agree to it. As such, I won't accept this imperial edict." There was a slight commotion in the crowd, but it soon quieted down. The officials eyed each other speechlessly. Prime Minister Qin said expressionlessly, "I've only studied at the house for 7 years, but I've never forgotten one thing. The officials shouldn't obey the emperor's order." If the emperor's appointment of the marriage had a deeper meaning, the Prime Minister's reply had a deeper meaning as well. Duke Liu said while staring into his eyes, "You should be aware that this is not only the emperor's intention. Is the Aoyama sect really that impressive?" A nonchalant voice burst out from behind State Duke Zhan. The crowd looked over and found that the man who spoke was one of the people who hadn't knelt down earlier. The man was tall and big, with a cold and brutal energy, giving off a dreadful feeling. Bai Qianjun was ranked 2nd in the Dao competition, and he was a highly talented swordsman in the Yuanying state. More importantly, he was a distant relative of Bai Junren. He came to the manor of Prime Minister to support State Duke Zhan on behalf of the Zhongzhou school. It was then that a voice burst out from behind Duke Liu. The voice was somewhat lazy and seemed to be very listless. However, the contents of the voice caused many people's bodies to tremble slightly. Not bad. The Aoyama sect is indeed impressive. Zhuoruzhui walked out from behind Duke Liu. The guests didn't know who he was, but they guessed his background, causing an uproar. The expression on by Qianjuan's face was a bit terrible. Zhuoruzhui looked at him and said listlessly, "Beat me if you can." Woof. Chapter 484. In the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, Zhuoruzhui didn't succeed in assassinating the Qin emperor, but it was clear who was more powerful between him and Bai Qianjun. Even elders of the Zhongzhou school couldn't deny it. The expression on Bai Qianjuan's face grew even more terrible. The guests in the manner of prime minister had already guessed the background of him, and Zhuoruzhui, feeling shocked. This was merely a marriage proposal in Zhaoga City. Even though the two parties were the manner of prime minister and the manner of state duke, why would they bother these immortal masters who were supposed to be far away from the mortal world? Some of the guests quickly understood that it was just like how His Majesty, the Divine Emperor, personally arranged the marriage. This marriage represented more things. If the prime minister was willing to form a marriage alliance with the Jing family, it meant that he and the officials of the imperial court would support the Prince Jing Yao to inherit the throne. However, Yamatai would never allow such a thing to happen. It was impossible for the prime minister to agree to this marriage. Was the Aoyama sect going to force the marriage? No matter whether it was the appointment of the crown prince or the marriage, they couldn't be forced by force, at least not right now. Standing under a tree and looking at Zhuoruzhui confronting Bai Qianjun, Gu Qing mused. This was a difficult situation to solve. The fire in Xianyang City in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror had explained everything. They had no choice but to find another way. According to Zhuoruzhui's idea, it would be better to kidnap the seventh mistress of the manor of prime minister and then send her back to Aoyama together with Jing Li. However, Gu Qing was fully aware that this would bring many troubles and disadvantages later on. More importantly, this was not the result his master wanted. Looking at the handsome and composed son of State Duke Shan, Gu Qing narrowed his eyes. This son of State Duke Shan was an outstanding person. He was able to remain calm even though the day of the marriage proposal had encountered such an unforeseen event. Would he be able to remain so calm when he saw that young woman and his son later? There was a treasure shop on the street, not far from the manor of prime minister. This treasure shop belonged to the Gu clan. The Gu clan, a large clan in the south, had finally gained a foothold in Zhaoga City after decades of effort, and with the help of the manor of Duke Liu and the manor of Zhao. In the most secret room, the master of the Gu clan looked at the young woman with a pale face who was holding a child in her arms, saying, "Don't worry. According to our agreement, we'll take you away from Zhaoga City and let you marry an honest man, and we'll prepare enough money for you." This young woman had been the most popular girl in the brothel in Zhaoga City. A few years ago, she was bought by the son of State Duke Shan in private and settled in a private manor, where she gave birth to a daughter. Last year, country Duke Shan's Fu wanted to form a marriage alliance with the prime minister's Fu, so they naturally had to wipe this matter clean. However, no one had expected that she did not die, but was instead hidden by the Gu family. The young woman thought of the Gu family steward who had rushed into the courtyard that night, and her face turned even paler. She hugged the child even tighter and nodded. According to the original plan, she would be sent to the prime minister's manor and told the truth in front of all the guests and the prime minister. At this moment, a scholar walked into the room. This was the most secret room in the treasure shop. How did he get in? Looking at the young woman holding the child in her arms, he said sympathetically, "You won't have a good ending if you fall into the hands of the Gu clan. If you don't mind the hardships, you can work as a washerwoman in the vegetarian house. You can earn less money every month, but your child can attend classes for free. It's a good way out." It didn't take long. The scholar walked out from the treasure shop and went to the prime minister's manor. Prime Minister Qin was surprised to see him. He took 2 steps forward and asked, "Why did young brother Yin come here?" The scholar was none other than Shi Yun of Yamatai. He bowed to Prime Minister Qin and said, "The master is here too." Hearing this, there was an uproar in the prime minister's manor. Bu Xiao had a very high status. Why would he show up here? Shi Yun continued. He asked me to tell Big Brother something. But before that, I'd like to talk to the cultivation friends of the Aoyama sect. Hearing this, the guests in the Prime Minister's manor felt a bit disappointed, but then they felt excited. The Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school had a conflict because of this marriage, and now Yamatai was going to support the Prime Minister. Unexpectedly, Shi Yun didn't look at Zhuo Ruzhui, but looked at the tree outside the crowd. Countless gazes followed him and fell on the figure under the tree. Shi Yun said to that person, "The master of Prince Jing Yao has used such a despicable method. I'm a bit disappointed." By now, the guests realized that the ordinary-looking man was Gu Qing of Aoyama. They were quite surprised. Gu Qing didn't wait for the prostitute to show up, and he knew that his scheme had been foiled. But it didn't matter. He had prepared a few tricks for the son of State Duke Shan, so he didn't waste the last 8 days. No matter how influential Yamatai was in Zhaoga City, it was impossible for him to defeat all of them. But he had to answer Shi Yun's question first, because he represented the Shinma Peak of Aoyama and Prince Jingyao. You're not willing to be the master of Jingyao, but you're exonerating the son of State Duke Shan, who is such a despicable person. Gu Qing walked out from under the tree and said to Shi Yun seriously, "I'm not only disappointed, but also angry." There was an uproar in the crowd. State Duke Shan was furious. Shi Yun asked seriously, "That was more than a year ago. If you really want to save that girl and fight for the injustice, why did you wait until now?" Gu Qing said, "Do you want to say that I'm scheming?" Shi Yun said, "You're right." Gu Qing said, "I'm not Lu Shui, who only wants to fight for the injustice. I'm a businessman, so I have to return the favor when I save someone." Having heard the conversation, the son of State Duke Shan's face was as pale as a piece of paper. Zhuo Rizhui couldn't bear it anymore and said, "What are you talking about?" Shi Yun raised his eyebrows and said, "We'll talk about this later." Gu Qing was a little angry and said, "In order not to marry a disciple of Aoyama, you'd rather Lady Tsin marry a scumbag. What kind of books did you read?" "You're mistaken. I'm also against Lady Tsin marrying the son of State Duke Shan." Shi Yun shook his head and looked at the Prime Minister and said, "This is also what Master wants." There was an uproar in the crowd again. Gu Qing was a little surprised and asked, "Then why did you ask me those questions?" Shi Yun was silent for a while and said, "I just don't understand what kind of tricks you use to make Master change his mind." There was a small lake in the old plum garden. There was a dense forest by the lake. There was an old nunnery in the forest. Tian Jinren used to live here in the past. The spring breeze caressed the willows on the shore. Without the annoying sound of chess, it was very comfortable. There was a bridge over the lake, but nobody was on the bridge. Standing by the lake, Bu Xiao looked at the reflection of the willows in the water, his long blue robe falling into the water like the sky. This house master of Yamatai had an extraordinary bearing, giving people a feeling that he was unfathomable. Jing Zhou walked over from the bridge and said, "I made it clear in the letter that you should stop this marriage first, and then we'll talk about something else." Bu Xiao said, "I've already asked Shi Yun to go there. But you should know that the marriage can be stopped or restarted at any time. Even if the son of State Duke Shan can't get married, there are many people in Zhaoga City who can. As such, I hope what we're going to talk about is worth my trip." Jing Zhou didn't respond to him, walking toward the old nunnery in the forest. "I worked very hard to come back from Bing City to write it. The plot had been planned a long time ago. It's not a hot topic, but a coincidence." Chapter 485. The proposal of marriage was a happy event, but it would be a bad thing if two families came to propose marriage at the same time. It was the same for the uninvited guests, who were usually unwelcome, like Duke Lu, Zhuo Rizhui, and Gu Qing. Under the circumstances, the proposal of marriage had to end abruptly. The guests were asked to leave the manor of Prime Minister. Even State Duke Shan and his son left the manor of Prime Minister in humiliation. Zhuo Rizhui made it clear that since Yamatai had already refused the marriage, why did they stay here? To watch the show? Was the Aoyama sect a circus? Did they have a death wish? Yet Bai Qianjun stayed behind. No matter how Zhuo Rizhui mocked and ridiculed him, Bai Qianjun sat in the chair with a straight face. Nobody could do anything to him. As the son of Duke Liu and the youngest son-in-law of Prime Minister Qin, Lu Ming took the responsibility of pouring tea for Duke Liu. The tea made a crisp and cold sound when it was poured into a bowl, making the study room even quieter. Nobody in a manner of Prime Minister dared make a sound at the moment. The atmosphere was tense. Like Bai Qianjun, everybody wanted to know what Jing Jiao and Bu Qiuxiao were talking about at the moment, waiting for the outcome of the conversation anxiously. Gu Qing took the teacup and thanked Lu Ming. He walked to the window and looked at the distance while holding the teacup in his hand. He didn't know where the distance was, because he didn't know where his master and the house master of Bu Qiuxiao were going to talk. It was not until now that he realized that his master and Bu Qiuxiao had made an appointment, so his preparations were unnecessary. He didn't feel regretful or wasteful. On the contrary, he felt relieved, but he was also worried about his master. It was the most difficult thing in Chaotian to change the mind of the scholar Yamatai. What was his master going to do? After passing through the forest by the lake and arriving in front of the old nunnery, Jing Jiao halted his steps. Bu Qiuxiao came over and stood by his side. If someone saw this scene, they would definitely feel that it was very strange, or rather, incongruous. Bu Qiuxiao's cultivation state was not as high as that of Liu Bai, Tan Yuan, Zen Master, and the others, but his status was too high. Even though Jing Jiao was the reincarnation disciple of the immortal Jing Yang, he should have met Bu Qiuxiao in Yamatai out of respect. Jing Jiao said, Tian Jingren should be much older than you, but the Western Sea Sword School is very new. The Old Plum Garden was the place where the first plum meeting was held, and the Western Sea Sword School didn't exist at that time. What he said had many hidden meanings. Bu Qiuxiao came to Jing Jiao's side and said, How could you compare it with the plum meeting? Do you think this meeting is so important? Jing Jiao said, The plum meeting that year determined the situation of the human world, and our meeting this time will also determine the situation of the human world. There is no essential difference. Of course, the choice of the divine emperor would affect the situation in the human world, although the situation now was not as tense as it was in the past. After a moment of silence, Bu Qiuxiao asked, Do you think you are qualified to represent Aoyama? Normally, Jing Jiao wouldn't answer such a senseless and stupid question. If Bu Qiuxiao didn't think he was qualified to represent Aoyama, why did he come to see him? Yet, Bu Qiuxiao was indeed a good person. He had done a lot for the human race during the wars against the Snowy Kingdom and the Underworld. The Aoyama sect had always had a good impression of him. Back when the Fiend Prison was in turmoil, Bu Qiuxiao used the Dragon Tail Inkstone without hesitation when facing the old dragon. With the Dragon Tail Inkstone in his hand, Bu Qiuxiao could be called a semi-saint, but he was still no match for the immortals Tan and Bai. Yet, he came forward without caring about the feelings of the Zhongzhou school and the alliance between Yamatai and the Zhongzhou school. As a result, Jing Jiao had a good impression of Bu Qiuxiao. As such, Jing Jiao decided to have a serious talk with Bu Qiuxiao, saying, The current situation in Zhaoge City is caused by me. You must be curious about the relationship between me and the emperor and what Aoyama intends to do. Bu Qiuxiao thought Jing Jiao was talking about the matter of Gu Qing becoming the teacher of Jing Yao, but he didn't know that Jing Jiao was actually talking about something else. It was Jing Jiao's idea that the emperor decided to depose Jing Xin. Jing Jiao did it because he had met Jing Xin in the Old Plum Garden and thought Jing Xin wasn't very useful. I won't tell you the former, because I think it's troublesome, but I can tell you the latter today. Jing Jiao continued, The requirement of Aoyama is simple and clear. Jing Yao will be the next emperor, and Jing Xin will become a monk in the Guoqing temple or die. Why? Asked Bu Qiuxiao with a faint smile. Jing Jiao said, I don't like Jing Xin. You know very well that he's not good enough. The Prince Jing Xin and those chancellors behind him had behaved foolishly and impulsively during the assassination attempt on Zhao Liu and the incident in the demon-suppressing town. The attitude of the Guoqing Temple is clear that Jing Yao is not good enough. Bu Qiuxiao said while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes, He's the son of the vixen. Jing Jiu said, that vixen is still stirring up trouble in Ozawa. The old dragon has done so many evil things in Zhaoga City, but has anyone done anything to him? And the unicorn has a bad temper, and those people in my sect are all demons. Bu Qiuxiao retorted, how can the ancient divine beasts be compared to the demons? Jing Jiu said, the so-called divine beasts are demons, but they have lived longer and have a higher cultivation state. Let's not talk about them. What about Zen Master? Bu Qiuxiao arched his eyebrows slightly, asking, what about Zen Master? Jing Jiu said, his adopted father is a mountain demon. Why didn't the Guocheng Temple burn him to death? Bu Qiuxiao fell silent. Jing Jiu walked to the front of the nunnery, pushed open the door, and walked in. Tian Jingren had lived here for a while back then, and he had tried to use his spiritual awareness to plot against Jing Jiu, but Jing Jiu had countered his plan. After the Battle of the Cloud Platform, the Institute of White Deer was burned down, and Tian Jingren had disappeared. It was unclear where he had gone. Jing Jiu suddenly felt something was out of place when he revisited this place. He knew about Guo Dong's scheme against the West Ocean, and he also knew that Tong Yin had been carrying out that plan. Was it related to this matter? After Jing Jiu walked out of the nunnery, Bu Qiuxiao was still standing on the same spot. Even if you have a good reason, I still won't agree to it, he said. The principle of Yamatai asked Jing Jiu. You can say that it's the rule. The rule is the rule, the order, and the foundation for the human race to have a foothold in Chaotian. Bu Qiuxiao went on. You have seen what Yin did in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. So you should know what we poor scholars are thinking. Jing Jiu said, sticking to the principle and being stubborn are two different things. Bu Qiuxiao said, in fact, I've been wondering how people distinguish between the two behaviors. Jing Jiu said while looking at him, if the scholar Yin had told the truth about your crime back then, you would have abdicated the position. This is sticking to the principle. But he refused to tell the truth and fled with the pen of the guard city. But he still thought you were not qualified to be the housemaster. This is being stubborn. What Jing Jiu said had another meaning. If Yamatai insisted on the principle, he would have to figure out who was right and who was wrong in this matter. It was impossible for him to be so ambiguous. After a moment of silence, Bu Qiuxiao said, you're the young senior master of Aoyama. In fact, I'm also the young senior master of the housemaster. The scholar Yin is my young master-nephew. Jing Jiu was not interested in listening to the old stories, saying, none of that matters. What matters is why he thought you were not qualified to be the housemaster. Bu Qiuxiao said calmly, while looking at Jing Jiu, if I didn't know that you had saved that person from the sword of the Shalai sword, I would have killed you today. Yamatai and Shui Yu Nunnery have nothing to do with each other. Why don't you kill me because of this? Jing Jiu asked while staring into his eyes. Is it because you feel guilty about that place, or is it because of the cause and effect you have left behind? It became exceedingly quiet around the nunnery hall. A gust of wind suddenly blew over from the lake. The wind passed through the forest and turned into countless indistinct lines, connecting the objects in the surroundings, including the rocks, grass, flowers, and leaves. Everyone would leave many traces and lines in their lives, and those lines would eventually lead to the most secret place. Bu Qiuxiao said calmly and earnestly while looking into Jing Jiu's eyes, many people have been trying to guess your real background, and they even suspected that you were the successor of the experiencing the mortal world of the Guocheng Temple, until He Zhan showed up. I didn't expect you to know the two-mind connection of the Guocheng Temple. But you have to know that it is of no use to me, and it will only irritate me. Jing Jiu had indeed used the two-mind connection, but he knew that he was not the big brother and couldn't completely master this secret method of the Guocheng Temple. So it was impossible for him to hear the thoughts of a figure like Bu Qiuxiao. On the contrary, he would be discovered by him. But it didn't matter, because he wanted to be discovered by Bu Qiuxiao anyway. If this was a bidding, it could be regarded as a trick. Bu Qiuxiao's reaction made him more certain of his judgment. The expression in Bu Qiuxiao's eyes grew cold as he asked, what on earth do you know? Jing Jiu said, Hejan is your son. There was no hint, no preface, no forward, no foreshadowing, and no foreshadowing. It was just a simple sentence, but it gave off a feeling of decisiveness and decisiveness, as well as a feeling that it was directed at one's true nature. The expression in Bu Xiaoxiao's eyes grew even colder, like a block of ice. Then it shattered into a shocked expression. You had an affair with the one in the nunnery, and you gave birth to Hejan. She failed to break through the state because of this affair, so she passed away, leaving only that sedan chair behind. Jing Jiu continued. The scholar Yin knew about this affair, and he felt that you were not fit to be the house master due to your immoral conduct. So you wanted to kill him to silence him? It was deathly quiet in the old plum garden. The wind on the lake passed through the forest incessantly, turning into dense threads, making it difficult for Bu Xiaoxiao to breathe. He didn't understand why the secret that he had kept for dozens of years was suddenly exposed by Jing Jiu. Nobody knew about this affair. Shuiyu Nunnery didn't know about it. Neither did Yamatai, and even Hejan didn't know about it. Even the scholar Yin only knew what had happened before he fled. So how did Jing Jiu know about it? His right hand was trembling slightly, as if he was ready to strike at any moment. Chapter 486. The atmosphere in the manor of Prime Minister was also tense, except for Zhuoruzhui. He was sleepy, as usual. Prime Minister Qin had a terrible look on his face, and by Qianjun was expressionless. Shi Yun sat in silence, still not believing that Jing Jiu could persuade his master to change his mind. Guqing suddenly thought of a possibility, his face turning pale and his right hand trembling, wondering if there would be a problem. No, Bu Qiuxiao was not that kind of person. He could only hope so. In the old plum garden, glancing at Bu Qiuxiao's slightly trembling right hand, Jing Jiu said, Don't try to kill yourself, or I'll tell the whole world about it. Bu Qiuxiao stared into Jing Jiu's eyes and asked, Why not kill yourself? Because you don't know if I've told anyone about it, so it's not safe to kill me. Jing Jiu said, And in my opinion, the scholars in Yamatai have become pedantic in their studies, so I don't think they'd do such a thing. Bu Qiuxiao said after a long moment of silence, Yes. Having said that, he took a deep breath. The wind on the lake blew, swaying the treetops. His eyes regained their calmness and clarity, saying, So I've never thought of killing Junior Master Yin. Then why did he run away? Jing Jiu asked. He didn't know what I was thinking, so he thought I would kill him. But on the other hand, he still thought I wasn't that kind of person. Maybe because of this, he didn't tell anyone the secret until the end of his life. Bu Qiuxiao gazed at the lake through the woods, saying sentimentally, Because of the same trust, I've always regarded him as a disciple of the house. His life lamp has always been in the house, but it has become a memorial tablet now. Scholar Yan's life lamp had always been in Yamatai. That was why Bu Qiuxiao found it in such a short time after he was killed by Shiwang's son and rushed over. Jing Jiu shook his head and said, They're all too stubborn. Bu Qiuxiao said, He just couldn't accept what had happened to me. Jing Jiu said, It's hard for most people to accept it, not to mention him, who has become pedantic from studying. Bu Qiuxiao withdrew his gaze and said to him seriously, This story is different from what you think. Jing Jiu said, Of course. You were still young then, the future master of the house, but she was already the supreme elder of Shuiyu Nunnery. How could you? Bu Qiuxiao's eyes suddenly turned cold. Jing Jiu stopped talking. Bu Qiuxiao suppressed the complicated emotions in his mind and asked, Tell me, what do you want? Jing Jiu said, You have to agree and push forward the marriage between Li and Censure. As for the matter of the throne, Yamatai will remain neutral. After a moment of silence, Bu Qiuxiao said, In fact, I really want to know what you will do if I don't agree. Regarding that incident, Jing Jiu only had a guess. He did not have any proof. Even if he had proof, would the past events have any fatal influence on an important figure like the master of Yamatai? I can ask the curtain rollers to spread the news, but it will take too long. I will go to Shuiyu Nunnery directly. Jing Jiu said, If Shuiyu Nunnery knows that the person is you, what will happen when she wakes up? How many people in Yamatai will survive? Bu Xiao fell silent again and said, she swore to serve the great Tao, but she was forced to violate the precepts. I was willing to take the responsibility, but she was not. Later on, there was a problem. I don't think I'm wrong, but I also know that I can't get away with it. But I don't understand why she did it. Jingjiu asked, her choice or concession? It's the word love. Bu Xiao said, back then, I only knew how to read books, but I didn't know the meaning of this word. After this incident, I read many more books and understood many things, but I still don't understand it. Jingjiu thought of what Zhao Liu had said. The horse eats grass on the hillside, and the grass doesn't owe it anything. He said, maybe it's the cause and effect of the previous life. She owes you too much, or you owe her too much. Bu Xiao raised his hand to indicate that he didn't want to discuss this matter anymore, and said, how can I trust you? Jingjiu said, when has Aoyama ever broken its promise? I've met Guinanshan, Guhan, and the other young people many times. I can trust them, but not you, because you're not an ordinary disciple of Aoyama. Bu Xiao said, and I have to make sure whether this is your idea or Aoyama's. Jingjiu said, my idea is Aoyama's idea. You should have thought it through when you came to see me. Bu Xiao said, I came because of the seal on the letter. A story didn't need any evidence, and one could fabricate it to one's heart's content, and then change the direction and the ending according to the audience's reaction. But this kind of thing needed evidence. Jingjiu took out a small green bamboo board, on which a rooster was carved. This was the life board of the demonic phoenix, which he used as the command board of Shinma Peak back then. The reason was that Shinma Peak was ranked the last among the 9 peaks. The demonic phoenix was dissatisfied with this reason, because in its eyes, its youngest meant the first, not the smallest. Nevertheless, this small bamboo board had become a sacred object of Aoyama. The presence of the bamboo board was like the arrival of the immortal Jingyang. The reason Bu Xiao agreed to meet Jingjiu that day was because he saw this seal on the letter. Looking at the small green bamboo board, Bu Xiao felt sentimental, like all the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian. In the end, he accepted Jingjiu's suggestion, but he had one request: give the pen of the Guard City pen back to us. Jingjiu said, Lu Shui is a disciple of your Yamatai now. Giving the pen of the Guard City pen to him is no different than giving it back to Yamatai. Bu Xiao couldn't help but remark, if the immortal Jingyang knew that Aoyama has become like this, I wonder what he would think. Jingjiu said, believe me, he would be surprised by the change, but he would like it. Looking at Jingjiu's face, Bu Xiao remarked, it's really inappropriate for such a beautiful woman to say such a shameless thing. Lu Shui's temperament is suitable for using the pen of the Guard City pen. Jingjiu brought up the matter again, saying, he is your disciple now, so it's not a big deal to give it to him. We can't let Yizhan get all the benefits. In the last few decades, Yizhan and Wang Xiaoming were the luckiest people in the cultivation world. Yizhan's endless luck couldn't be completely arranged by Shui Yununnery. Guodong should still be in the cocoon at the time. Jingjiu continued, you have to be responsible for curing Shui's illness. This is what you promised the sect master and Zen master. Bu Xiao remarked in a mocking tone, are you going to use this matter to threaten me all the time? The name of Yizhan should have been given by the nunnery, but it happened to be given to you. Jingjiu said calmly, the house master is someone who will become a saint. There's no need to be involved in the cause and effect. What the scholars of Yamatai cultivated was the orthodox cultivation path, and what they pursued was the peace of all ages, as well as becoming a saint while they were still alive. All roads lead to the same goal. This was the same principle as the ascension of the Taoists. Bu Xiao demanded while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, what are you trying to say? Jingjiu said, you have promised so many things today, so I'll give you one thing in return. Please, said Bu Xiao. The saint is nameless, said Jingjiu. Xian opened his eyes and reached out his hand to pick up the paper crane flying in from outside the window. He used the amulet magic to untie it. Seeing a few lines of words on the paper, his expression changed slightly. After a long moment of silence, he handed the paper to Prime Minister Qin by his side. Having read the contents of the paper, Prime Minister Qin lifted his head and glanced at Gu Qing with a complicated expression. Gu Qing felt relieved. He stood up and cupped his hands to Prime Minister Qin. Prime Minister Qin nodded expressionlessly in response. Gu Qing pushed open the door and walked out. Seeing Jing Shang and Jing Li standing under the tree, he flashed a faint smile. Jing Shang was still bewildered, but Jing Li had already come back to his senses. He clenched his fists excitedly and waved them twice. Looking at the sky outside the manor of Prime Minister, he thought that his young uncle was truly outstanding. It didn't take long before the silvery laughter rang out in the backyard of the manor of Prime Minister. The maidservants and servant girls in the manor of Prime Minister felt relieved, thinking that the seventh mistress could finally get married, to say nothing of those relatives who had complicated relationships with the Cloud Dream Mountain. Leaning on the windowsill, Censure looked at the sky outside the manor of Prime Minister, her face full of delight, thinking that the 2 cups of tea she had poured for her uncle were truly worth it. The good news spread in Zhaoga City. The palace of Prince Jing Xin was the first to receive the news. Both the prince and the immortal masters of the Zhongzhou school had a terrible look on their faces. Yet, the royal palace was filled with a jubilant atmosphere. Jing Yao felt happy because his brother Jing Li had finally brought home a beautiful woman, and royal concubine who felt happy because of Jing Yao. She had selected many things to send to the Jing house, treating them as if she were marrying a daughter-in-law. Regardless of whether they were happy or angry, the marriage between the manor of Prime Minister and the Jing family had shocked everybody. Yet, nobody knew how Jing Jiu had convinced Bu Qiuxiao. The scholars of Yamatai paid too much attention to their reputations, both when they were alive and when they were dead. In Jing Jiu's eyes, this was the biggest problem. The path toward heaven didn't bother with trifles. After he figured this out, he had no more obstacles ahead of him, which was why he said the nameless saint that day. The nameless saint could be understood literally or in a deeper sense, but either way, it would be helpful for Bu Qiuxiao. Again, Jing Jiu had a good impression of Bu Qiuxiao, though Bu Qiuxiao had obviously concealed many facts from him during the conversation in the Old Plum Garden. Hejan's biological father was probably not him, but that person was more important than his own life and reputation. Even though he was several hundred years older than Jing Jiu, it was not a big deal for Jing Jiu to break the body-cleansing ring. After Lien Sanyue appeared, Shuiyu nunnery had changed a long time ago. There was nothing he couldn't tolerate. It was probably because of He Zhan's biological father, and Bu Qiuxiao was the scapegoat for that person. The former house master Yamatai was a man of virtue and prestige, and he loved his wife very much. He had written a poem about her, Crossing the River, which had been passed down for hundreds of years until now. If the person who had an affair with the great grandmaster Shuiyu nunnery was this former house master, everything could be explained. Bu Qiuxiao had been cleaning up his master's mess when he was away from Yamatai. It was reasonable for him to take care of Yizhan in secret after the death of the former house master. Yet the scholar Yin had misunderstood everything. Bu Qiuxiao couldn't defend himself. Yet, he couldn't be sure of his speculation because Bu Qiuxiao would never admit to anything, and Yizhan's parents had died decades ago. Thinking of this possibility, Jing Jiu had a better impression of Bu Qiuxiao. As a disciple, it was his duty to take care of these matters for his master. Could he be considered a nameless hero? There was an immortal abode by the White Horse Lake. It was famous for its banquets. As long as one was paid enough, the hot pot could be cooked in an exquisite manner. Jing Jiu walked into the private room, and his line of sight fell on Gu Qing's face through the mist. "You've worked hard over the last few years," he said satisfactorily. "Have some wine tonight." Gu Qing was flattered and didn't know what to say. Then, he saw Lu Shui, thinking that he was a troublemaker. "You need to prepare for the cultivation tournament, so don't drink," said Jing Jiu. Lu Shui agreed obediently. "Rujui," said with a smile, We are all cultivation practitioners, so it's no big deal for me to drink some wine. Jing Jiao shot him a glance, wondering why he came to the Shinma Peak to freeload when he was a nobody. Chapter 487. Zhuo Ruzhui was baffled, wondering why he was looking at him. Suddenly, he heard the applause from downstairs. He walked to the window and looked out curiously. There was a table in the dining room of the immortal abode, and a storyteller was standing by the table, speaking passionately. Yesterday, we were talking about the plum meeting 20 years ago. The bloody plum blossoms in that painting were too many to count, and could be considered a marvelous sight. It is said that this painting is now hidden by the emperor in the imperial palace, just like that chess game. At this point in the cultivation tournament, everyone knows that the immortal master Jing Jiao is undefeatable. Who would have thought that a shocking change would occur in the snowland at that moment? Jing Jiao naturally wouldn't listen to this. He walked into the room and sat down, motioning for Gu Qing to serve him a bowl of plain soup. Gu Qing was a bit surprised. He quickly scooped the soup, skimming off the foam so that there wasn't even a drop of oil. Lu Shui noticed this detail and was very impressed. Jing Jiao drank tea occasionally, but rarely ate. Even when he ate hot pot with Zhao Liu, he would at most pick a piece of vegetable. It was rare to see him drink soup like today, indicating that he was in a good mood. It wasn't because of Yamatai's promise to remain neutral in the struggle for the throne, but because of Li Er's marriage. In the eyes of the Zen sects, helping another person's marriage was a meritorious deed. In this regard, both he and his senior brother had been greatly influenced by the Guocheng temple. The soup in the bowl was milky white and looked very rich, but it didn't have the slightest fishy smell. He took a sip and discovered that the soup base was actually soybean milk, and there were also chunks of broth, garlic fried in lard, and a few mushrooms. This was a result of his acute perception and deep understanding of his childhood memories, and had nothing to do with his interest in food. Eating was for survival, but mortals had made it so complicated. He felt it was unnecessary and shook his head subconsciously. Gu Qing thought that he didn't like the noise downstairs, so he waved his hand and released the inherited heaven sword, forming a small formation that isolated the sounds and smells of the outside world. Lu Shui sighed again, thinking that junior martial brother Gu Qing was indeed much stronger than he was. With Gu Qing taking care of his young master, he didn't need to worry and could study in the temple. The storyteller downstairs was talking about how Gu Qing and Xiang Wanshu would meet Jing Jiao and Bai Zhao in the snowland 6 years later with a group of young cultivation practitioners. At that time, Zhuo was cultivating in seclusion in the abode of Tingguang Peak, so he did not know the details of this matter. He was listening with great interest. Suddenly, he found that the voice had disappeared. He could not help but feel annoyed and said to Gu Qing, "How could it be cut off at such a critical moment?" Gu Qing smiled and asked, "Why do mortals know about masters' deeds?" To mortals, cultivators are no different from immortals. Naturally, there will be rumors circulating. Gu Qing sat down and said, "A figure like young senior master is probably more famous than Bai Zhenren in the mortal world." Jing Jiao was so famous for a few reasons, such as the legendary stories he told. The soup in the hot pot had already boiled. All kinds of vegetables were put into the pot one by one, and the four of them started eating. Nobody spoke a word. It was so quiet in the private room that one could only hear the sound of the soup boiling, the vegetable leaves bobbing up and down, and the sound of the mutton being scalded by the edge of the pot. Not talking while eating was not in line with Zhuo Rizhui's character. Though he had spent some time with Jing Jiao and Lu Shui in the royal palace of the Chu kingdom, he was still not used to it. Soon he had finished 7 plates of mutton, picked up the teacup to rinse his mouth, and grabbed a handful of melon seeds. Then he left the private room again to continue listening to the storyteller. He pushed open the door and came out. The formation opened the passage. The voice of the storyteller drifted in again. Take the marriage that has caused a sensation in Zhaoga City as an example. It can be said that it's an inappropriate choice. Though Master Jingshang is a high official of Taichung Temple, he can't be compared to the Prime Minister. Why did Prime Minister Qin agree to marry his favorite granddaughter to the young master of the Jing family? It's not because the young master of the Jing family is the study companion of the second prince. It has something to do with the biggest secret of the Jing family. The door of the room was closed, and the formation isolated the sound again. Jing Jiu put down the soup bowl in his hand. Zhuo Ruzhui went downstairs to listen to the storyteller after finishing 7 plates of mutton. Gu Qing had finished a basket of vegetables and started boiling the new tea, and Jing Jiu had just finished drinking the white soup in his bowl. Lu Shui got up hurriedly and cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks in front of Jing Jiu. He poured a cup of freshly brewed tea and placed it in front of Jing Jiu. Sitting on the stool, Gu Qing looked at the fire quietly, occasionally brushing off the foam on the surface of the pot. Jing Jiu glanced at Gu Qing and thought of Bu Qiuxiao again, thinking that this disciple of his was really good, showing an appreciative expression in his eyes. Gu Qing was flattered again, and even felt nervous, wondering what he had done right today. Jing Jiu said to Lu Shui, "After the plum meeting, you go back to Yamatai and study hard. Don't worry about anything else." Lu Shui said embarrassedly, "I also feel comfortable staying in Yamatai." Jing Jiu had thought that the style and temperament of the scholars in Yamatai would be similar to that of Lu Shui, which was why he asked Lu Shui to go there. Gu Qing said, "Xiaohe's identity in the imperial court has been made public, but she is nevertheless a vixen, and you know the style of Yamatai. Don't let her get too involved in the windy corridor." "I'll remind her to be careful," said Lu Shui. "You can go now," said Jing Jiu. This meant that he wanted Lu Shui to leave. They had finished eating the hot pot, and he had told Jing Jiu everything he needed to remind him of, so why didn't he leave? Lu Shui was a bit nervous, asking, "Young master, you won't get angry, will you?" Jing Jiu shot him a glance. Lu Shui knew that his young master would get angry if he kept asking, so he left the room hastily. In addition to having a high cultivation state, talent, and status, the immortal master's appearance and demeanor are also unparalleled. He's the real person in the painting, no, the real immortal man. The voice of the storyteller came into the room again. Ruzhui walked into the room and closed the door behind him. "Are you going to let him go, just like that?" he asked Jing Jiu seriously. Jing Jiu wondered if Jing Jiu was going to treat Lu Shui to a midnight snack. Gu Qing was also worried, saying, "It looks like big brother Lu Shui really likes Yamatai." Ruzhui walked to the table and asked with furrowed eyebrows, "What if he has really joined Yamatai?" In his eyes, Lu Shui was someone with natural Tao quality like himself. How could he let him leave Aoyama? Jing Jiu thought there was nothing to worry about. If Lu Shui stayed in Yamatai, he would become an important figure in the house of Yamatai, even if he couldn't compete with Shi Yun for the position of the housemaster. By then, Yamatai would be more inclined to join Aoyama. The reason was simple. If Chao Yuan stayed in the Windy Broadsword Church, the Windy Broadsword Church would become the staunchest ally and supporter of the Guoqing Temple. If the Zen master stayed in the Guochang Temple, the Guoqing Temple would have a close relationship with Aoyama. Many disciples of the Cloud Dream Mountain went to other cultivation sects or became officials in the imperial court. As a result, most of the cultivation sects in the north had become the subordinates of the Zhongzhou school, and they had many supporters in the imperial court. As a result, it was difficult for the emperor to choose a successor. These were all old stories under the sky. Seeing Jing Jiu ignore him, Zhuo Ruzhui couldn't do anything about it. Thinking of what had happened that day, he asked curiously, "Senior Master, how did you persuade Bu Qiuxiao?" Jing Jiu still didn't pay any attention to him. He put on the conical hat and walked out of the private room. In the hall downstairs, the storyteller had finished the story he had been narrating for 2 days. There's no one like him in the world. The three of them left the restaurant of the immortal abode and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Ruzhui led the disciples of Aoyama to participate in the plum meeting, so he had to go back to his residence. Jing Jiu led Gu Qing into the royal palace, and they went to the bedroom of the royal concubine Hu first. the royal concubine who didn't expect them to enter the royal palace in the middle of the night. She put on a cloth to cover her curvy body and asked a servant girl to inform Jing Yao to come over. No need. I just want to tell him a few things. Jing Jiao said, Gu Qing will stay here for a year. He will live in the royal palace. It's safer there. Hearing this, the royal concubine who was taken aback, thinking that Jing Jiao was not a eunuch, so why couldn't he come to the royal palace every day to teach Jing Yao's homework? Gu Qing also thought it was inconvenient. As he was about to say something, he suddenly understood his master's intention. Prince Jing Xin was the candidate chosen by the Zhongzhou school to be the next emperor. With Yamatai's neutrality, the conflict could escalate at any moment. If Jing Xin stayed outside the royal palace, he could be used or threatened by others. Jing Jiao said to Gu Qing, if the royal decree hasn't come out in a year, you should go back to Aoyama immediately. Gu Qing was in the initial state of the free travel, and his cultivation state was still stable, so he didn't need to stay behind closed doors for the time being. However, it would be detrimental to his cultivation if he stayed like this for a long time. Having said that, Jing Jiao left the royal palace. It was very quiet in the royal palace at night, and the atmosphere was a bit awkward. Gu Qing turned around and walked to the outside of the royal palace. He asked the eunuch to arrange a place for him to stay as far away as possible. The royal concubine who tightened her clothes. The first thing we have to do is to ensure Jing Yao's safety. Jing Jiao said to the emperor, though the Zhongzhou school shouldn't act so crazily, who knows? The emperor said, the great formation of the royal palace is here. Even if Tan and Bai came in person, they would have a hard time breaking through it. But the young Yao and Gu Qing will have to suffer a bit. Jing Jiao said, the cultivation practitioners stay behind closed doors for 10 years. If he can't even survive 1 year, he won't have any future. The emperor said, you shouldn't expect me to have another child. Jing Jiao said, Bu Qiuxiao actually had such an idea the other day in the old plum garden. Jing Xin was the choice of the Zhongzhou school, and Jing Yao was the choice of the Aoyama sect. Yamatai had supported the former because the scholars of the house couldn't accept the identity of the royal concubine who. If the emperor was willing to have another child, regardless of whether the child was a boy or a girl, the problem would be solved. However, the emperor was unwilling to have a child with a woman other than the royal concubine who. The emperor asked, how did you convince the house master Bu? Zhuo Ruzhui wanted to know the answer as well. Everybody wanted to know the answer as well. Jing Jiao didn't tell him, and neither would Lu Shui. It was believed that as time went by, it would become a real secret one day. This might be unfair to Hejian, but it was a matter between Hejian and Bu Qiuxiao. Aoyama didn't want to get involved in it. Jing Jiao said, you have been an emperor for too long, so it's inevitable that you will be influenced by the art of emperors. You have to remember that you are of the Jing family, not those mortal emperors who don't have the power to break through the sea realm. If you don't obey, just kill them. The emperor said, you can't be too cautious when it comes to governing a country. If you don't know anything about it, don't come up with any ideas. Jing Jiao said, if you are really good at governing a country, how come the imperial court is still filled with people from the Cloud Dream Mountain after hundreds of years? The emperor was annoyed and said, why don't you do it? Jing Jiao got up and walked toward the outside of the grand hall. Why is this child the same as Lu Xi? They both know how to do this. Jing Jiao was ready to go back to Aoyama. He had already told the emperor about the snow girl, and the marriage between Jing Li and Yamatai had been settled. As such, Jing Jiao had no intention of staying in Zhaoga City any longer. There was a dark alley not far from the royal palace. The big trees by the street blocked the starlight. It was so gloomy that it was frightening. Jing Jiao's Dao heart quivered slightly as he sensed that someone was watching him. But who could hide from his sword discernment and come to his side? Or was that person very far away? The starlight was shredded by the tree branches, falling on his conical hat like snowflakes. There was nobody around. Unless that person was like Jing Jiao, he couldn't hide from Jing Jiao's eyes. Yet, as the storyteller said, there was no one like Jing Jiao in the world. As such, that person was not a human being. Jing Jiao turned to look at the shadow under the tree and said, "Come out. First, I need to correct the mistakes. I wrote Bu Qiu Xiao as Xiao yesterday. Why? I don't know why. In fact, all the words I wrote were correct in the beginning, but when I checked them, I naturally thought they should be Xiao. It took me a lot of effort to change them to Xiao one by one. I don't even know what was wrong with my brain at the time. However, I can tell from the chapter 1 wrote yesterday that everybody is indeed an onlooker who likes to watch the gossip. The title of the chapter is From the Divine Throne of the Third Young Master. Chapter 488. The assassins of the highest state of the Old Ones might be able to use a certain method to hide themselves in the shadows, but the shadow under the tree was real, so there was only one possibility. It was a projection from the underworld. 20 years ago, in the Mingtsue Valley outside Jiaoga City, the assassins of the Bulo Lin failed to assassinate Zhao Leiyu, and they were killed by the projection of the third disciple of the Underworld Master. Whose shadow was it that appeared in Jiaoga City tonight? The shadow bulged slightly, as if it were about to break away from the ground. It gradually revealed its shape after being illuminated by the starlight refracted on the wall. The figure was short and stout, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. It could be vaguely seen that he wore a colorful cloth, indicating that he had a very high status in the underworld. Let me introduce myself. The short and stout figure had a charming and gloomy voice, but he also had a powerful and awe-inspiring energy. His voice sounded a bit strange, indicating that he seldom spoke the human language. I'm the Grand Priest of the Underworld. If the Underworld Master was the most powerful swordsman in the Underworld after the death of the King of the Underworld, there was only one person who had the right to object. The Grand Priest had the blood of the royal family of the Underworld flowing in his veins, and he had a very high power and cultivation state. He was a truly important figure no matter how one looked at it. If it were any other cultivation practitioners, or even the elders of various sects, they would have two reactions when they saw the Grand Priest of the Underworld suddenly appear in front of them. They would either scream to warn others with a pale face, or they would pass out due to fear. Yet, Jing Jiao was quite calm, as if he had met an old man asking for directions. "What's the matter?" he asked. The voice of the Grand Priest drifted in the alley like the wind, as if it would break at any moment. "Aren't you afraid of me?" he asked, sounding a bit surprised. "Maybe you're very powerful, but this is Jiaoga City. Even if someone is afraid, it should be you," said Jing Jiao. The Grand Priest said, "I went to Aoyama to have a look back when your master ascended. Jiaoga City is nothing to me." "Get to the point," said Jing Jiao. The High Priest's colorful clothes mixed with the gloomy shadows, looking extremely strange, just like his voice. "I heard that you're a person who is very good at negotiating, so I guess you don't have to stick to your position." What Bu Qiu said made sense, but Jing Jiao had figured out something else. His conversation with Bu Qiu had just taken place today, but it had already reached the underworld. He said, "Be more direct." The High Priest said, "If the seal of the King of the Underworld is really in your hands, perhaps we can cooperate." Sure enough, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall, not even the giant wall between the human world and the netherworld, not even the abyss. The conversation between Jing Jiao and Bu Qiu was transmitted to the underworld. Even the conversation between him and the Underworld Master that nobody knew about was learned by the Grand Priest. Jing Jiao said, "I talked to him first." The High Priest said, "It doesn't matter. I'm just reporting to you and leaving my name. When you make a decision in the future, just remember that there's still me. At least give us a chance to bid." "I can't imagine what benefit I can get from cooperating with you," said Jing Jiao. The Grand Priest said, "Striking the remaining evildoers of Taiping is the greatest benefit." Jing Jiao suddenly asked, "Are you familiar with Zhongzhou School?" The Grand Priest said expressionlessly, "If you don't trust me, just pretend that I have never been here. But I hope you can remember this conversation." Having said that, the starlight grew dimmer and the shadow under the tree grew lighter. The wind died down and the leaves fell down. The shadow returned to the ground, and everything returned to normal. Jing Jiao turned around and left the alley. He didn't go back to Aoyama, but to the old plum garden. The nunnery hall in the plum garden was enshrouded by the starlight, as if a layer of clean water was washing the eaves soundlessly. Jingjiu walked into the nunnery hall and sat down in front of the dusty table. It was not the grand priest himself who came, but his projected image. But if the grand priest suddenly struck, Jingjiu would encounter a great deal of trouble, because the great formation of Zhaoga City might not be activated. Since the grand priest dared project his projected image in Zhaoga City, he must have received some kind of protection. Since it was not Taiping Jinren, who could it be? The king of the underworld had been imprisoned in the fiend prison for more than 600 years, and it was normal that the Zhongzhou school had been in contact with the underworld secretly. Did the Cloud Dream Mountain want to confirm his identity again? Or did they want to harm him and Aoyama? Jingjiu had always thought that Zhaoga City was the safest place besides Aoyama and the Guocheng Temple, and nobody would try to assassinate him here. But thinking of what had happened in the Guocheng Temple 2 years ago, he realized that this opinion was questionable. The starlight passed through the window and shone on Jingjiu, casting a shadow on the ground in front of the table. In the next moment, the shadow drifted up slightly, like a leaf blown up by the wind. He had seen the same scene not long ago. Again, Jingjiu felt a bit tired. The figure in the shadow this time was much smaller. It was the projected image of the underworld master this time. "How did you know I was here?" asked Jingjiu. The underworld master flicked his blue cloth lightly, the figure in the shadow flickering intermittently. "If he could know our conversation, why can't I find out what he is up to? In fact, it was I who leaked the information about the seal of the king of the underworld on purpose." The conspiracies and struggles related to power and influence were always so exciting and boring for Jingjiu, regardless of whether they were in the human world or the underworld. Jingjiu knocked on the table in front of him and demanded, "Get to the point. How did you know I was in the old plum garden?" The underworld master didn't answer Jingjiu's question. "Cooperate with me and send the grand priest into the underworld river," he said. "What's the benefit?" Jingjiu asked. The underworld master walked to the window with his hands folded behind his back. The shadow outside the window dimmed the starlight. His projected image was even smaller than his actual body, looking like a peculiar and dreadful puppet. "I've investigated for a long time, and I've finally ascertained that he has been in contact with the Cloud Dream Mountain in secret. Killing him will benefit both me and your Aoyama." The underworld master turned to Jingjiu and continued, "And if he goes to the underworld river and sleeps forever, the chaotic situation in the underworld will be pacified as soon as possible, and you and I can choose the new king of the underworld with a peace of mind. Does this mean that we have reached an agreement?" asked Jingjiu. The underworld master said, "I'm neither Lu Ci nor Yuan Qijing. It's not enough for you to persuade me to betray the immortal. I'll only cooperate with the final winner. You are so weak that I can't trust you." "I won't see you out," said Jingjiu. The underworld master said, "I'm here to deliver a letter. Are you sure you don't want to know the content of the letter?" Jingjiu wanted to take out the bamboo chair and lie on it, but he remembered that the bamboo chair was being squatted on by the snow girl. As such, he had no choice but to lie on the floor and look at the stars outside the window. The underworld master flicked his sleeve after shooting a glance at Jingjiu. The shadow turned blue and vanished without a trace. He had met two of the most powerful figures of the underworld in the span of one night. Even Jingjiu felt surprised and tired. He had behaved nonchalantly during the two conversations, and he even displayed a condescending attitude, but it was merely a show. Both the projected figures of the Grand Priest and the Underworld Master posed a great threat to him. The difference in their cultivation states was too great. If Jingjiu didn't have the seal of the King of the Underworld, these two conversations wouldn't have taken place. If he didn't have the life board of the Dark Phoenix and that secret, Bu Qiuxiao wouldn't have negotiated with him here during the day. A youth traveling in the world with the most precious book in his hand and discussing the Tao with the kings and nobles was, in fact, a dangerous thing to do, even though it seemed to be a carefree and easygoing act. Jing Jiu knew who wrote the letter mentioned by the underworld master. It was indeed the most convenient and fastest way to communicate in the vast Chaotian through the projected figures of the important figures of the underworld. The problem was how the people in Chaotian could transmit the information to the underworld. Before he had the mosquitoes of the fiend prison, only Taiping Jinren had the ability to do so, and the Zhongzhou school might have a way to do so. He knew his big brother too well, and he was well aware that he would fall into the trap of the other party if he merely took a look at the letter. As such, he didn't want to read the letter at all. There was another issue. If the Grand Priest followed him through the information from the Zhongzhou school, how did the underworld master know that he was in the old plum garden? Jing Jiu didn't even know that he would come here before he thought of it. Jing Jiu felt something was out of place. He had a similar feeling when he talked with Bu Qiuxiao in this nunnery hall during the day. Was it possible that someone had left a trace in his body that could be traced? Jing Jiu recalled his experience in this life carefully and checked the tiniest part of his body, but he didn't find anything suspicious or suspicious. Back when he fought against Tian Jinren in the air, the spiritual awareness of his opponent had indeed entered his body, but there was no trace of it left in his body. His body was still as clean and pure as before, except that there were some natural worm silks in his abdomen and spine. Jing Jiu thought of this in silence. The night passed quickly. The morning sunlight shone on the window. Jing Jiu stood up and was about to leave, but he suddenly found a line of words on the ground where the underworld master had disappeared. A cloud is drifting over from the south. Seeing this line, Jing Jiu's body grew stiff. He turned slowly to look at the south outside the window. There were countless clouds in the sky in the south, but which one was the one that had to die? Chapter 489. Looking at the sky outside the window, Jing Jiu remained silent for a long time. The silence seemed to be nothing, but it usually represented a certain emotion. It was seldom seen on Jing Jiu because it was completely different from being in a daze. A cloud drifted over from the south. This statement shocked Jing Jiu even more than the appearance of the two important figures of the underworld. Jing Jiu felt regretful. Since he had decided not to read the letter from his big brother, why did he read it in the end? However, this was indeed a letter he had to read in person. It was because the content of the letter was too important. The only thing in the world that could temporarily heal the deep rift between him and his big brother and make his big brother forget the bottomless hatred was that cloud in the south. Jing Jiu, of course, knew what this statement meant. And he also knew why his big brother wanted to inform him as soon as possible by employing the underworld master. The cloud in the south was actually a patch of fog enshrouding the islands, and an old man was hiding in the fog. The name of the old man was Nanchu, the first hidden swordsman in Chaotian, and the most powerful enemy of the Aoyama sect. It was because of this man that their grandmaster, the immortal Guangyan, failed in his ascension and died while sitting on the ground. Jing Jiu had no regrets when he ascended in his former life, but killing Nanchu was one of the top 3 things he had to do before his ascension. Unfortunately, Nanchu was still hiding in the fog, so Jing Jiu had no way to kill him. Yet, the cloud had left the South Ocean and drifted toward Chaotian. This was an opportunity that his brothers, and even the whole of Aoyama, had waited for over 800 years. How could they miss it? The islands were still enshrouded in the thick fog, and it seemed that nothing had changed. Nobody knew that a patch of fog had separated from the islands a few dozen days ago, and it was drifting over the surface of the ocean 1,000 miles away. The patch of white fog was about the size of a thatched hut, drifting over the blue ocean soundlessly, giving off an eerie vibe. The bright sunlight couldn't penetrate the fog, and the reflected light made the patch of white fog look a bit dazzling. It looked more like a cloud than a fog. Fortunately, the boatmen traveling on the ocean were used to seeing all kinds of strange lights. Even if they saw the patch of bright cloud, they wouldn't pay much attention to it, let alone get close to it. As spring deepened, dark clouds became more and more common, and summer storms began to brew. The sun's appearance became shorter and shorter, and the white cloud became more and more inconspicuous. One day, A big ship from Punglai Island passed through the real fog and suddenly saw the cloud in front of it, causing several soft exclamations. The clouds were very gentle. Be in the sky or on the sea, they would not cause any harm. Naturally, the ship did not slow down, nor did it change direction. It sailed towards the white cloud. People came to the deck one after another, wanting to see the scene of the cloud being smashed by the bow of the ship. It was completely silent. The ship smashed through the cloud and continued forward. It was completely silent. Everyone on the ship was dead. Their eyes were closed. Some of them were holding ropes in their hands, while others were holding cups of tea. The white cloud continued to drift towards the north. After drifting for a long time, it finally arrived on land. It was early in the morning, and the sky was just beginning to brighten. The small fishing village by the sea was suddenly shrouded in a heavy fog. The morning sun leaped over the surface of the ocean and illuminated the sky, but it couldn't disperse the fog in the village. All the villagers could do was wait helplessly for the fog to move to the north. Finally, some of the village houses had left the area covered by the cloud and fog, revealing their original appearance. But it was deathly quiet, and nobody had woken up. A cough suddenly broke out on the beach. A young girl was struggling to get up. Her bare legs, covered by her short skirt, were covered with sand, and the silver bells on her dress rang out once in a while. Her name was Nanjung, and she had been a formidable assassin of Biolo Lin. She escaped on the night when the cloud platform was destroyed, but her magic treasure was taken away by Guodong. The fact that Aoyama was still as formidable as ever made her feel hopeless. To say nothing of taking revenge, it was difficult for her to even see the peak master of Qingrong. Feeling disheartened, she returned to the south and concealed her identity until this day. All the people in the fishing village were dead, except for her. Looking at the corpses of the villagers lying in front of her house and on the beach, and sensing the quietness around and the thunder-like sound of the waves, Nanjing's face grew exceedingly pale. She looked at the patch of cloud and fog, not daring to make a sound. An aged voice came out from the fog. "Are you a southerner?" "Yes," replied Nanjung in a trembling voice. The aged voice said, "Since you are a southerner, it's reasonable for me not to kill you." Nanjung asked fearfully, "Are you a senior master of my tribe?" "I'm your ancestor," said the aged voice. The cloud and fog dispersed gradually, revealing an old man. The old man was thin and shriveled, looking like a withered corpse. His eyes, which were as deep as the thick fog, were filled with visible lethal intent from time to time. He said he was Nanjing's ancestor, not because he was swearing, but because he was stating a fact. Many people thought he was a prince of a small kingdom in the South Ocean. In fact, the southern barbaric tribes were all his descendants. His name was Nanchu, and he was called the Great Grandmaster of the Foggy Island. He had another more famous identity, the first hidden swordsman in Chaotian. He was the greatest enemy of the Aoyama sect, and also the most powerful opponent of the Aoyama sect. The immortal Guang Yuan was killed by him, and the immortal Qinzhou was eager to break through the cultivation state because of this incident. In the end, he disappeared in the cloud and fog of Aoyama. The former was the grandmaster of Taiping Jinren and the immortal Jingyang, and the latter was their master. It was easy to imagine how formidable this great grandmaster of the Foggy Island was. In terms of cultivation state, he had already reached the upper limit of the heavenly arrival state 800 years ago, a true sword fairy. Kneeling on the beach, Nanjung didn't dare raise her head, let alone speak. She thought in shock that the Foggy Island had been locked up for many years because of the sword formation of Aoyama. How could the great grandmaster leave and appear on land? Nanchu was aware of what was on her mind, but he didn't explain it. He had been hiding on the Foggy Island for hundreds of years. He had no hope of ascending, and his life was about to run out. He had at most a few decades left to live. He had to finish that task before it withered away. What task? Of course, it was to destroy Aoyama. The cloud and fog will disperse eventually. The great grandmaster of the Foggy Island looked up at the dim morning sun outside the fog and said emotionlessly, "Find me something with heavy yin qi." The object with the heaviest inchi in the world was, of course, a coffin. Nanjung had lived in this village for several years, so she was very familiar with each family. She carried a black coffin out of the yard outside the salt pans. The coffin was made of nanmu, which had been kept in the backyard for more than 20 years. It was full of inchi, but the cranes, deer, and ghosts carved on the coffin were a bit clumsy. Nanjung put the black coffin into the fog, looking pale. She was afraid that the great grandmaster would be displeased. There was no sound in the fog, but it started to flow slowly. It didn't take long for all the fog to enter the black coffin. The fishing village became clear again. A few yellow amulets fell from the air and sealed the coffin, ensuring that no breath leaked out. There was a Taoist gate outside the peaks of Aoyama, on which were written the words South Pine Pavilion. This was the South Mountain Gate. There was a wooden table under the mountain gate, on which there were writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone. A man in a gray sword robe was sleeping on the table. Hearing the footsteps, the man raised his head. It was Ming Guoxing, whom Jingjiu and Lu Shui met when they entered Aoyama. Decades had passed, and this disciple of Aoyama, who hadn't been able to break through the state, looked a bit old. Looking at the man who walked to the mountain gate, he couldn't help but rub his eyes. The man had an ordinary face, figure, and breath. No matter how he looked at him, he was just an ordinary person. The problem was, how could an ordinary person find a mountain gate of Aoyama's sect? Ming Guoxing was a bit alarmed, thinking that he couldn't make the same mistake as before, thinking that martial uncle Jingjiu was useless, so he stood up quickly. "May I ask who you are?" The ordinary person smiled and said, "I am a letter." The old ones had always used the method of taking people as their trust. Before and after the assassination of Zhao Liu, Bulo Lin had sent such a letter to him. Later, Taiping Jinren sent another letter to the old dragon, telling him that a devil had come to the fiend prison. What was the content of today's letter? Ming Guoxing didn't dare open it, nor did he dare keep it for himself. He reported it to the inner gate hastily. It didn't take long before the elder Mo arrived at the southern mountain gate and brought the letter to Tianguang Peak. The bright sunlight and the blue sky shone on the undulating ocean of clouds in front of Tianguang Peak at the same time, looking like the ocean in the south. "What's the content?" asked Lu Ci while looking at the ordinary person. That person was indeed an ordinary person, but he didn't show any fear when facing an important figure like the sect master of Aoyama, saying, "Old immortal, you can read it yourself." Lu Ci stared into his eyes. It was quiet on the top of Tianguang Peak. The shadow cast by the sheath on the stone monument slowly lengthened. After a long while, Lu Ci said, "It's done." The person walked toward the edge of the cliff. "You don't have to die," said Lu Ci. The person said, "Thanks for your mercy, old immortal, but I have to die." Since it was a letter, it couldn't be left behind after it was opened. Otherwise, the secret would be discovered. The person walked to the edge of the cliff and jumped into the ocean of clouds calmly. He didn't scream horribly or scream. After a long while, a faint crashing sound could be heard at the bottom of the cliff. Lu Ci walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the West Ocean 1,000 miles away, remaining silent. Chapter 490. The immortal Daiyuan was actually the immortal Guangyuan instead of Guangyuan Jinren, the peak master of Shuriyue, in 2 places the day before. Jingjiu was about to enter the main plot of this chapter. He was a bit nervous, but his nervousness turned into anticipation when he thought that the spring festival was coming and he would have a long holiday. Another person arrived outside the southern mountain gate. Ming Guoxing was startled. He stood up hastily and bowed to Jingjiu. Jingjiu nodded and walked over, turning into a patch of white cloth at the far end of the mountain path. He didn't ride the sword. It was not because of the courtesy, nor was it because it would be troublesome to activate the great formation of Aoyama. He had the command board with him, so he didn't need to worry about these things. Compared to riding the sword, he was more used to walking for the distance of 100 miles. He could enjoy the sceneries and meditate while walking, and he could sort out those complicated matters that were hard to figure out and calculate in his mind. It didn't take long before he arrived at the South Pine Pavilion. Dozens of small courtyards were hidden among the green pine trees. Those young external disciples were either practicing boxing under the pine trees or meditating by the stream. Jingjiu and Lu Shui had studied here 30 years ago. He had gradually forgotten many details, like the boring youth's surname Shui. He wondered which elder's grandnephew was. On the contrary, the memory of 800 years ago was more vivid. He could still remember that when he was brought away from the royal palace of Zhaoga City by the Grandmaster, his big brother stood in the square in front of the Grand Hall and watched him gradually turning into a black speck. It was true that he was brought back to Aoyama by the Grandmaster, the immortal Daoyuan. It was because he was a true genius in cultivation. After he came to Aoyama, he hadn't seen the Grandmaster a few times before he was assassinated by Nanchu. In the following 100 years, his master stayed behind closed doors in an attempt to break through the hidden world state and go to the Foggy Island to kill Nanchu. But he was too anxious and died as a result. The situation had changed. His big brother and Jingjiu became orphans without the care of the elders, living a miserable life on the peak of Shangda Peak. His big brother accepted disciples without hesitation. He first recruited 2 talented disciples, Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi, and then the Dark Phoenix and the Night Howler. At that time, he did nothing but cultivate in silence, hoping to catch up to his senior brother as soon as possible and help him. In the end, he really caught up with his senior brother and stood beside him. Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi also improved their realms at an unimaginable speed. Shangda Peak became stronger. Under the leadership of their senior brother, they challenged the other peaks. The whole of Aoyama was in chaos. Blood flowed like a river. The orthodoxy of Aoyama was restored. While thinking about these things, Jingjiu had already walked past the South Pine Pavilion and arrived at the small building. In the small building, there were portraits of the ancestors and important figures of Aoyama. The last 2 portraits were of Taiping Jinren and Jinren Jingyang. Jingjiu looked at the 2 portraits and thought about something. He had never been a sect leader, but of course he had the right to put it here. What did the letter that senior martial brothers sent back represent? Did it mean that Taiping Jinren had returned to Aoyama? After walking past the small building, Jingjiu arrived at the center of the 9 peaks of Aoyama. The sword-washing stream looked like a golden silk swaying slowly under the sunlight. The young disciples by the stream were shocked to see Jingjiu. "Greetings, Senior Master," they greeted him as they separated hastily and bowed to him. "Greetings, young Senior Master," some courageous young disciples yelled. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to these young people, nor did he nod to them. He kept walking toward the deep end of the sword-washing stream. The difference in seniority was too great, so it was not a problem of rudeness. In his eyes, these children were no different from the little monkeys on the cliffs by the stream. The young disciples by the stream didn't feel relieved until the white cloth disappeared on the cliff wall at the end of the sword-washing stream, straightening their backs. They pressed their hands on their chests, their faces full of surprise and delight, thinking that they were lucky enough to meet the legendary young senior master. Walking forward a few miles, the clouds grew thicker and hundreds of stone pillars shot up into the sky, looking like countless swords. This was the place where the sword trials were held in Aoyama. Coming here meant that Tianguang Peak was right in front of them. Jingjiu still didn't ride his sword. Instead, he walked toward the peak along the mountain path. Flying swords passed by from time to time. Seeing the fluttering white cloth on the mountain path, the disciples of Tianguang Peak stopped immediately. They cupped their fists and bowed to him, watching him go up. It didn't take long for Jingjiu to reach the peak of Tianguang Peak. He hadn't been here for many years, but the formations and settings on the peak hadn't changed much. He walked to the front of the stone tablet. He didn't even look at the sword sheath on the tablet. He reached out and patted the round turtle's back lightly. The round turtle opened his eyes and glanced at him, wondering if he had already made up his mind. Lu Xi was sitting on the edge of the cliff. He was very tall, even though he was sitting. His feet seemed to reach into the sea of clouds. Jing Jiu walked to his side and sat down, gazing at the sea of clouds in front of the cliff. The gentle breeze blew over, and the weather was fine. The peaks poked out of the sea of clouds, looking like fairy spirits. The snow-capped Shanghai Peak could be seen clearly. Even the Sword Peak, enshrouded in clouds and fog all year round, could be vaguely seen. The sword lights of Liangwang Peak flashed incessantly. Shuriwa Peak and Shilai Peak seemed to be connected together. Bihu Peak looked like a short pine tree in a bonsai. The farthest Shinma Peak was as lonely as a sword. The people on Qingrong Peak looked at it blankly. There seemed to be an invisible barrier between heaven and earth in front of them. There were countless beautiful nameless peaks on the other side, which were the rumored hermit peaks. If one looked further, one could even see the muddy river. Aoyama is beautiful, said Jingjiu. Lu Xi said, I think Aoyama is very charming. I think Aoyama is the same when she sees Senior Master. Said Jingjiu. Lu Xi said, this must be your first time here. Jingjiu said, why do I come here if I have nothing to do? Lu Xi said, why did Senior Master come here today? And you walked all the way here. Jingjiu said, I want to confirm some facts. From the South Pine Pavilion to the Sword Washing Stream, to the Sword Forest, and then to the top of Tingwang Peak, he had been searching for the memories of the past, and also inspecting his own territory. After a moment of silence, Lu Xi asked, what did Senior Master confirm? Aoyama is my Aoyama. Jingjiu said, while looking at a spot outside the ocean of clouds, so I agreed to his request. Lu Xi felt a little emotional. He wondered how the cultivation world would react if they knew about this. The history of Chaotian in the last 600 years was written by the immortal Taiping Jinren and the immortal Jingyang. The first time they joined hands, they suppressed the swordsmen of the peaks and continued the tradition of Aoyama. The second time they joined hands, they destroyed the headquarters of the mysterious dark sect and forced a figure like the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect to the underground. The Aoyama sect became the most powerful force in the cultivation circle, and nobody dared challenge them. 600 years later, they were not as powerful as they had been, but they still didn't need to join hands. They could inflict so many losses on the Zhongzhou school simply by relying on their Dao hearts. If they joined hands this time, what kind of story would they leave behind in the history of Chaotian? Lu Xi said, he also wrote me a letter. Jingjiu shot him a glance, saying nothing. That letter was delivered to the South Pine Pavilion. Shanghai Peak would know it, even if I didn't tell them. Lu Xi continued, maybe he did it in passing, but it's still a good way to provoke them. No sooner had he said this than a gust of wind and snow fell down. The ocean of clouds rippled as the 3-foot sword broke through the clouds and arrived in front of the cliff of Tingwang Peak. The body of the sword was a bit dim, covered with a thin layer of frost. It's hard to tell if it's true or not. Maybe he did it on purpose to cover for you. Yuan Qijing's deep voice came out from the 3-foot sword. Lu Xi knew that Yuan Qijing had been informed by Jingjiu. He arched his eyebrows slightly, saying nothing. It was quiet on the top of Tingwang Peak. The atmosphere was a bit depressing. Back when Taiping Jinren escaped from the sword jail, it meant that there must be a ghost in Aoyama. It must be a powerful ghost who could do it. Over the last 30 years, Jingjiu, Lu Xi, and Yuan Qijing had seldom met each other, and they had never talked about this matter, but they all had their own thoughts. Were they going to talk about it today? Chapter 491. 30 years ago, the ascension of the immortal Jingyang attracted the attention of all of Chaotian. Nobody knew that Taiping Jinren, who was behind death doors in name, but was actually imprisoned in the sword jail, had escaped from it. Taiping Jinren must have had a helper in Aoyama, since he could pass through the sword formation set up by the immortal Jingyang in the passageway and escape from the heavily guarded underground of Shangda Peak. Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing began their investigation. They first found out that 2 pieces of Thunder Soul were missing on Bihu Peak. As a result, the peak master of Bihu, Lei Poyan, was locked in the sword jail on the pretext that he had gone mad. Less than 2 years later, Lei Poyan suddenly escaped from the sword jail. He yelled in the peaks, "If there is no one, what about two?" The whole of Aoyama heard him. One of the two missing pieces of Thunder Soul Wood was indeed sent to the sword jail by Lei Poyan. He helped Taiping Jinren transfer his soul to the body of a devil man of the underworld, and used this method to pass through the sword formation set up by Jingyang. Lei Poyan did this because he had been stuck in a broken sea state for many years. Taiping Jinren had promised him that he would give him the two swords of the highest state in Aoyama to help him break through the sword formation set up by Jingyang. It was a risky thing to do, but Lei Poyan had made the choice most cultivation practitioners would make before the great fear struck him. However, even though Taiping Jinren had transferred his soul to the body of that devil man of the underworld and reincarnated as Ian San, he would still be in the sword jail, and Lei Poyan wouldn't be able to help him escape. Who had helped Lei Poyan send the piece of Thunder Soul Wood to the sword jail? Who had asked the dead dog to remain silent and take Ian San away from the sword jail? 30 years had passed, and though nobody had mentioned these questions, they were still on the minds of many people. Fang Jingtian respected and loved his master Taiping Jinren the most. Moreover, he was the master of the Shilai Peak, who held a high position. Moreover, he had been concealing his true state all these years. Naturally, he was a suspect. It was because the sword jail was located at the bottom of the Shangda Peak, and Lei Poyan was killed by Yuan Qijing himself. It looked like he had killed him to silence him. More importantly, the whole of Chaotian knew that he didn't like his senior master Jingyang. Now, it seemed like Yuan Qijing had been suspecting Lu Xi all along. Just like what Jing Jiu had said to Zhao Liu, everyone in Aoyama had a guilty conscience, so everyone looked like a ghost to them. Yuan Qijing's cold voice came from the 3-foot sword. "You're the sect leader, so you should shoulder this responsibility. You have to give us an explanation." 300 years ago, the major cultivation sects in Chaotian and Zhaoga City reached a consensus and agreed with the decision of Aoyama to lock Taiping Jinren in the sword jail instead of killing him. It was because Aoyama had promised to lock Taiping Jinren up until his death. After the incident in the Guocheng Temple, many people began to suspect that Taiping Jinren had escaped, but they couldn't question Aoyama because they didn't have any evidence. What if someone found the evidence? It was not easy to be the leader of the Orthodox sections. The Aoyama sect was under a great deal of pressure. The snowflakes kept on falling down from the ocean of clouds, drifting up with the wind, and landing on the top of the Tianguang Peak. It was a marvelous scene. It didn't take long before the snow, a few feet deep, accumulated by the cliff's edge. It represented Yuan Qijing's attitude and mood. Lu Xi didn't explain it, but raised his eyebrows. The sheath of the inherited heaven sword on the stone monument exuded a faint sword will, turning the air into a wind. As the gentle wind blew over, the accumulated snow on the cliff grew thinner, exposing the black rocks underneath. The two figures in the heavenly arrival state exuded a powerful energy. Even a swordsman in the broken sea state couldn't sit still. He could be wounded at any moment. The round turtle had lived for a great many years, so his shell was thick and his skin hard. The regular attacks of the swordsman in the heavenly arrival state couldn't hurt him at all. As such, he was not afraid of the energy exuded by the swordsman in the heavenly arrival state. But he was still a bit scared. He turned his head slowly and looked at the side of the peak top, where nobody was present. He didn't open his eyes the entire time. As he said in his mind, "You guys can do it yourselves, or you can find a dog. This has nothing to do with me." Sitting by the cliff's edge in the wind and snow, Jing Jiu's expression didn't change much. Though he was merely in the free travel state, the invisible sword wills could do little harm to him. "Enough," Jing Jiu said to the 3-foot sword outside the cliff. "It's not like he wants to be the sect master." Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing confronted each other. Jing Jiu was the only one in all of Chaotian who could mediate the conflict. A sneer came out from the 3-foot sword. As rumored, the sword justice of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing didn't like his senior master at all. Jing Jiu thought that the hum from Tianguang Peak sounded better. "Tell me about that letter," he said. The wind and snow abruptly dispersed, and the sheath on the stone monument returned to its original state. The round turtle stuck out his tongue to lick a snowflake that had fallen to his nostrils. Then he remembered that he hadn't drunk water for more than 70 years. He was also interested in the letter sent by Taiping Jinren to Aoyama. He opened his eyes stealthily and looked at the edge of the cliff. Jingjiu reached out his right hand to the air and produced a water bead the size of a fist and flicked it over. The round turtle opened his mouth and swallowed the water bead, a satisfied smile showing in his eyes. Lucy said, "My master said in the letter that he had already gone to the West Ocean." And then Yuan Qijing's voice rang out again. Lucy said, "He wants us to take advantage of this opportunity to wipe out the West Ocean." The 3-foot sword fell silent. Wiping out the Western Sea Sword School was a great temptation for Aoyama. In other words, it was what they had always wanted to do. In the cultivation circle, the Aoyama sect had never caused any trouble, nor did they bully other sections. The only exception was the West Ocean Sword School. Some people thought it was because the Western Sea Sword School also practiced the sword work, and some thought it was because the Western Sea Sword School and the No Mercy sect had a deep grudge against each other. The No Mercy sect could be said to be the staunchest ally of the Aoyama sect. Yet, these were not the real reasons. The Aoyama sect believed that the godly swordsman of West Ocean was the disciple of the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, so they had been suppressing him openly and secretly. The godly swordsman of West Ocean was truly outstanding. He had led the whole sect to grow stronger and stronger under the tremendous pressure from the Aoyama sect. It wasn't until a few years ago that the Aoyama sect led all the sects in the south to invade the West Ocean and overturn the cloud platform that the Western Sea Sword School could no longer become a top-tier sect. Lu Shui had done a great job in this event, so Lu Si and Yuan Qijing allowed Jingjiu to take him away from the sword jail. The elders of the other peaks didn't make any noise, even though they knew that he had left. However, in the Battle of the Cloud Platform, the godly swordsman of West Ocean sacrificed his tail to survive. Though the strength of his sect had been reduced by more than half, he was still alive. Now that the Aoyama sect was the leader of the orthodox cultivation sects, they couldn't act at will or without a good reason. If they wanted to attack the Western Sea Sword School again, they had to have evidence, no matter whether it was Bulow Lin or some other evil deeds. Now that the Aoyama sect had the evidence, Taiping Jinren used himself as the evidence. The fact that he hid in the Western Sea Sword School was the most evil deed he had done. As long as they were certain that Taiping Jinren was at the West Ocean, the Aoyama sect would get the support of other orthodox cultivation sects no matter how forceful they were. But why did Taiping Jinren want to do so? What did he want to gain from it? Lu Si said after shooting a glance at Jingjiu, "Maybe he thinks Aoyama is still his, so it's natural for him to do so." Jingjiu didn't think it was that simple. His big brother must want more than the destruction of the West Ocean, like the first child sword or the cloud drifting over from the south. Nanchu might show up, Jingjiu said. It was exceedingly quiet by the cliff's edge. The round turtle felt nervous. If that was the case, then there was nothing to discuss. Killing the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanchu, was something the orthodox cultivation sects of Aoyama had to do. But how could Nanchu dare leave the Foggy Island? Wasn't he afraid that he would be discovered by the sword formation of Aoyama and die a horrible death? Jingjiu said, "What I'm concerned about is why he believes that he can deceive Nanchu and Jianshalai." Lu Si said, "In some people's eyes, our master and we have an unsolvable grudge. The fact that our master has contacted the two hidden swordsmen has further strengthened their judgment." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "So, the crux of the matter is whether you trust him or not." Lu Si didn't say anything. The 3-foot sword was quiet as well. Jingjiu pressed, "What if his real purpose is to kill you? The great grandmaster of the Foggy Island was the bait, and Aoyama would be tempted. If the real target of Taiping Jinren's scheme was Aoyama, Aoyama would be in danger. If both Lu Si and Yuan Qijing had a mishap, Aoyama would be as good as wiped out. Even if only one of them had a mishap, Aoyama would have to stay behind closed doors for at least 100 years, waiting to see if Fong Jingtian or Guang Yuanjinren had a chance to break through the heavenly arrival state. Otherwise, they wouldn't open their mountains like the No Mercy sect. Lu Ci pondered for a moment and said with a solemn expression, "I trust him on this matter. I don't trust him completely, but we have to do it, and I think it's quite simple." Jing Jiu got up and looked at the ocean of clouds outside the cliff, saying, "Kill Nanshu and then kill him. The world will be at peace then." Chapter 492. The world would be at peace only if Taiping was killed. Though this statement sounded interesting, Lu Ci and Yuan Qijing didn't laugh. It was because what Jing Jiu said was the consensus of the whole world, and the world referred to those at the highest level. Jing Jiu's intention was clear and explicit. No matter what Taiping Jinren thought and how the situation of the West Ocean would develop, Aoyama had to treat Taiping Jinren as an enemy and kill him. However, it was a difficult task. The great Grand Master of the Foggy Island, Nanshu, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean were both the most powerful swordsmen in the human world. Together with Taiping Jinren, the young mysterious Dark Master, and those highly achieved swordsmen of Bulo Lin hiding in the dark, could Aoyama defeat them? The more complicated the situation is, the easier it is to deal with it. Jing Jiu continued, "No matter what schemes they have, all we need to do is to go all out and destroy them, and then we can ignore them." Lu Ci said with a bitter smile, "Senior Master, the phrase going all out is used to describe the bad guys. We are bad guys to begin with, and the good guys don't live long." Jing Jiu glanced at Lu Ci and said, "Remember to bring the chicken and the cat with you." The round turtle, who had been eavesdropping on the three of them, felt relieved after hearing this. Lu Ci asked, "Forget about the white ghost, but the dark phoenix, are you sure you want to bring him along?" "His life board is in my hands," said Jing Jiu. "What if the powerful enemies sneak attack Aoyama after we all leave?" The voice of Yuan Qijing came out from the 3-foot sword again. It was evident that he was worried that some swordsman in the Zhongzhou school or the underworld would come here to make trouble while Aoyama was going all out. A similar incident had occurred 300 years ago. The underworld master led a group of swordsmen and sneaked into Aoyama, but they were all killed by the immortal Jingyang with one swing of his sword. However, without the immortal Jingyang guarding Aoyama, the dead dog guarding the sword jail, and the round turtle enduring the sunlight, those regular disciples might be harmed. Jing Jiu said, while looking at the 3-foot sword outside the cliff, "Don't worry. Let Little Fourth stay here to guard the place. The rest will go all out." Lu Ci uttered him twice. Yuan Qijing snorted and said softly, "All the swordsmen of Green Mountain went to the West Ocean to fight. As such, who could they harm even if a true swordsman sneaked into Green Mountain? Fong Jingtian? As for the treasures in the peaks, they were protected by the forbidding formations. The dead dog would show up if the incident got out of hand." This method was simple and brutal. It was tantamount to turning Green Mountain into a huge sword that could sweep across Chaotian. Who could resist it? Lu Ci knew that Jing Jiu's arrangement had a deeper meaning. "It's a good idea," he said after a moment of silence. Yuan Qijing didn't express his opinion further, asking, "What about Nanshu?" If the most uncertain factor in the Battle of the West Ocean was the attitude of Taiping Jinren, then the most difficult part was how to kill Nanshu. In Chaotian, the great Grand Master of the Foggy Island, Nanshu should be the highest in terms of age, generation, and cultivation state. If he had become the personal disciple of the immortal Daoyuan, both Jing Jiu and Yin San would have to call him Senior Master. Nanshu was already a figure in the upper state of the heavenly arrival a few hundred years ago, like a fairy swordsman. Though he was much older now, his sword work must have become more profound. Lu Ci said, "I'm the sect master. I'll do it. You don't even have a sword. How can you kill someone?" Yuan Qijing snapped icily. Lu Ci was an important figure in the highest state in Chaotian. so he had no one to complain to. He had a few chances to complain over the years, but he always complained about this matter. As the sect master of the sword sect of Aoyama, he didn't even have his own sword. As such, when Yuan Qijing objected to him using this matter, Lu Xi was speechless. He sighed after shooting a glance at Jingjiu. Jingjiu thought that it was because Lu Xi couldn't defeat Nanchu without a sword that his cultivation state was not high enough. It had nothing to do with him. Lu Xi's line of sight hadn't moved away from Nanchu. Jingjiu felt a bit pressured as he suggested, "Should we ask the Snow Girl for help?" Lu Xi said, "The little girl is no match for Nanchu even if she recovers." Jingjiu said, "I'll ask the little girl to join hands with you." Lu Xi said hesitantly, "I don't think it's a good idea." "Of course not." Yuan Qijing's voice was exceedingly cold. "You people know that she is a little girl." The sword practitioners of Aoyama emphasized straightforwardness. Only by being upright could one be brave. Lu Xi looked at the distance, saying nothing more. Jingjiu didn't mind it, but he couldn't think of a way to ask the Snow Girl to strike. Thinking of the green sky mirror from the Snow Girl, Jingjiu said, "It seems that Tong Yin is also interested in the West Ocean. It should be a scheme that was planned a few years ago." Lu Xi asked, "What is the plan of those children? They don't want to mess up our plan." "I'm not sure," Jingjiu said. "All I know is that it has something to do with Guidong." Yuan Qijing said tersely, "The senior master is good at killing people. I'm afraid that he's not even as good as our young sister when it comes to scheming." Lu Xi uttered, agreeing with this statement. Jingjiu turned around and walked to the front of the stone monument. He lifted his head and took a look at the sheath inserted into the surface of the monument, reflecting on something. "You people should think about what to do next." Having said that, Jingjiu patted the shell of the round turtle and called out the sword of the universe, leaving on the sword. The desolate sword light illuminated the top of the Shima Peak. The feeling of spring had faded. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka were cultivating with their eyes closed in the Taoist hall. The white cat was fiddling with the bell on his neck while crouching by the cliff's edge. Jingjiu walked into the manor cave after shooting a glance at the cat. A ray of sunlight shone down from the deep end of the manor cave. Zhao Leu was sitting with her legs crossed. The thoughtless sword was rotating slowly in the air above her head, exuding a marvelous aura. Jingjiu sat down in front of her. Zhao Leu opened her eyes and found Jingjiu looked a bit tired. "What has happened?" she asked in surprise. Jingjiu told her about Zhaoga City and the letter. "What do you think?" asked Zhao Leu. "Is it about the West Ocean?" asked Jingjiu. Zhao Leu said while staring into his eyes, "No, I'm asking about the ghost in Aoyama." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "We should be able to find out who it is this time." It had been 30 years since he came back to the human world along the river in the mountains. During these 30 years, he had been thinking about who the ghost in Aoyama was. In the beginning, he and Yuan Qijing both suspected Lu Xi, so he gave Lu Xi many chances, but Lu Xi didn't do anything. He had been secretly looking after Shima Peak over the years, helping Jingjiu in the Dao competition and severely wounding the young mysterious Dark Master in the Guoqing Temple. In any case, Lu Xi shouldn't be suspected anymore. Could it be Yuan Qijing? The sword jail was in Shangda Peak, and Lei Poyan was killed by Jingjiu. Yuan Qijing was the prime suspect. As Jingjiu walked into the manor cave, he removed the formation. A sound came in from outside the manor cave. It was Yuan Chu talking to Ping Yongka. At the inherited sword competition, Jingjiu asked Zhao Leu to take Yuan Chu into Shima Peak. It was an agreement with Yuan Qijing, but it was also a test. Hearing Yuan Chu's voice, Jingjiu fell silent. No matter how powerful Nanchu and Jian Shalai were, and whether this was a scheme of his big brother, he had nothing to worry about as long as Aoyama was safe. Aoyama was like a sword, unparalleled in the world. But what if there was a ghost in Aoyama? What if the surface of the sword looked smooth and perfect, but there were cracks on the inside? The reason he accepted the letter from his big brother was not only to kill Nanchu, but also to ascertain who the ghost was. Yet, he didn't consider that if one of them was a ghost, even if all the swordsmen of Aoyama came out, it would still be a dangerous situation, especially for him. Zhao Leu thought of it for him, saying, "It's too dangerous. We should leave." It required a great deal of determination to leave Aoyama. Jingjiu said, "If they wanted to kill me, I would have died a long time ago. The fact that I'm still alive means that they don't want to kill me, even if they are indeed ghosts." "No," said Zhao Leu. "It means that they don't get along well with each other, so they can't do anything to you because they are watching each other." The regular disciples, and even the caretakers of Aoyama knew that the immortal sect master Lu Xi and the sword justice Yuan Qijing didn't get along well. This was a fact known to the cultivation circle in Chaotian. The reason was simple. Yuan Qijing was his big brother, but Lu Xi became the sect master. Of course he didn't like it. Over the last 300 years, Tianguang Peak had been expanding its influence, and Liangwang Peak was on the verge of becoming a subordinate peak, relying on the authority of the immortal sect master. Shangda Peak had no choice but to rely on the sect rules and Yuan Qijing status. In fact, they entered the heavenly arrival realm on the same day. It's just that Lu Xi wanted to see the pine scenery of Shangda Peak, so he became his young brother a few steps later than Yuan Qijing. Jing Jiu continued, "Lu Xi hasn't said anything, but he must have his own thoughts. Yet, he broke through the heavenly arrival state much earlier than Yuan Qijing did." "Is that why Taiping Jinren chose Lu Xi?" asked Zhao Leu. "No," said Jing Jiu. "He was locked in a sword jail at the time, so I was the one who chose him." Zhao Leu was startled, asking, "Did you choose him based on the cultivation state?" "That's right," said Jing Jiu. "And Yuan Qijing didn't like me, so I chose Lu Xi." Zhao Leu was speechless. "I don't think it's a good idea," she said after a while. Jing Jiu said while looking at her, "Don't try to be a good person. It's because this world is too heavy. Even someone as powerful as Chao Yuan can't move it." When did his big brother feel that this world was too heavy? Even if Nanchu died and the Western Sea Sword School was destroyed, what benefits would he get from it? Big brother? The first child's sword? Thinking of all this, Jing Jiu looked at his right hand and took out the green sky mirror. He began to sharpen the sword silently, one stroke at a time. Seeing this, Zhao Leu suddenly felt sympathetic toward him, though she didn't know why. Chapter 493. The ocean waves lapped against the rocks, creating countless snowy waves. Facing the ocean, San smiled as warmly as the blooming flowers in spring. His energy was still so amiable and pleasant, giving off a sunny and cheerful feeling, as if he had no worries at all. Standing behind him, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect felt sympathetic while looking at Jing Jiu's profile. He sighed and took out a bone from his sleeve, raising it to his mouth and biting it. That bone was long and thin. It was hard to tell if it was the rib of a sea beast or the arm of a human cultivation practitioner, but it looked terrifying. Somehow, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect felt it was tasteless, so he put the bone away. Without turning his head around, Sin asked, "You used to like this the most? Why did your taste change?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said sadly, "Maybe it's because I'm getting old. Nothing tastes good. I still like hot pot, and I have a good appetite like a young man. I'm still interested in this world, and I still think it's not too late to work hard." Looking at the ocean, San continued with a smile. "So I want to live at least 500 years. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said earnestly, 500 years is not enough. The human race needs you to live for 50,000 years. I'm not that turtle on the top of Tianguang Peak." Looking at his right hand, San suddenly asked, "Is the sword really there?" The back of his hand was a bit dark, exuding a faint, deathly energy, looking like a withered tree. What was even more frightening was that his fingertips were like limestone. When the sea breeze blew, dust would fall from his fingertips. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said, "Su Zai said it's on Xiaoming Island, but Tian Jingren doesn't know it, so we can't confirm it. We'd better be careful." Xiaoming Island was the library of sword rarebooks of the Western Sea Sword School, and it was strictly guarded. It was indeed difficult to enter it without alerting the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School. Interesting, Ian San remarked. It seems that the most important things of the Western Sea are kept there. Even if the first child sword was not on Xiaoming Island, he would still go there. Few people knew that the center of the protective formation of the Western Sea Sword School was on that island. Time passed slowly. The ocean waves kept crashing, and the snowy waves didn't stop for a long time. The red sun sank into the water, and the dark night arrived. Under the faint starlight, Ian San and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect walked on the surface of the ocean toward the island. Illuminated by the faint starlight, Ian San and the mysterious dark grandmaster walked on the ocean. After 200 years of operation, the defenses here were extremely complete. Even if the protective mountain formation was not completely activated, the dangerous formations hidden under the sea were enough to kill the cultivators who came to spy on them. Yet, all this was meaningless to Ian San. It was not because the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had a profound cultivation state, but because he had swallowed the spiritual soul of Tian Jinren, so he knew the formation like the back of his hand. Back when the godly swordsman of West Ocean built his sect on these islands, it was Tian Jinren who was responsible for the overall design and the deployment of the formations. As suddenly a Tian of. The flying whale broke out of the sea and flew somewhere in the night sky. The sea, the island, sand, the ocean as the ocean as the sea. The sun you as. Years ago, the island was severely wounded by Yuan Qijing. After it recovered, the flying whale didn't dare go too far from the islands of the West Sea. It was unclear where it was going tonight and what it was going to do. Seeing the flying whale disappear into the dark night, Ian San turned his gaze to the island not far away. The island was full of green trees, which looked like ink in the dark night. It was a totally different world from the ocean illuminated by the starlight. The two stepped onto the beach along with the seawater and entered the dense forest. Avoiding the formations, they came to a remote manor cave in the mountain noiselessly. The ground was covered with rocks and fine sand. Apart from a few footprints, there were no other traces. The stone gate of the manor cave was tightly shut. It looked normal, but if one gazed at it for a long time, one would feel that the surface of the stone gate was flowing, forming countless tiny swirls. The center of the great formation of the mountain gate of the Western Sea Sword School was in this manor cave. If one could control the center of the formation, one could dismantle the great formation of the mountain gate at any time. Imagine that when countless sword lights arrived from Aoyama, the great formation of the mountain gate of the Western Sea Sword School suddenly disappeared. It would be an interesting scene. Thinking of the scene, Ian San laughed out loud. He walked to the front of the stone gate of the manor cave, reached out his hand to brush off the dust on the gate, and lowered his head to look at the flowing lines. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect walked behind Jingjio, turned around, and squatted down, staring at the outside like an old dog. The islands of the West Sea consisted of 700 islands of various sizes. There was a largest island in the middle of the islands about 300 miles away from Xiaoming Island, named the Fallen Immortal Island. The highest mountain on the West Sea Islands was located on the Fallen Immortal Island, where the Western Sea Sword School was located. The side of the mountain facing the East Sea was a steep cliff, and a manor cave was located on the top of the cliff. On the side facing the ocean, there was a huge hollow, about 1,000 feet wide and 100 feet high. This hollow looked like a huge window, where the ocean, rain, wind, and dark clouds could be seen, like a picture frame. Standing by the huge window, the godly swordsman of West Ocean was expressionless, like a stone statue or a figure in the painting. A deep and low whistle suddenly burst out on the surface of the ocean in the distance. The ocean water parted gradually, forming two magnificent white lines. Seeing this scene, the godly swordsman of West Ocean arched his eyebrows slightly, leaping out from the painting. It was because of him that the Western Sea Sword School was able to stand firm after being suppressed by Aoyama for so many years. He was in the upper limit of the heavenly arrival state and in the prime of his life, so his cultivation state and energy were at their peak. Tanned by the Zhongzhou school, Lu Yuan of the Aoyama sect, the chief monk of the Guochang temple, was getting old, but Qiu Xiao was too young and hadn't broken through the cultivation state yet, and the Zen master was even younger. The Shuaiyu nunnery was full of women, and Lin Sanyue's life and death were unknown. Who in all of Chaotian dared claim that they could defeat him in a fight to the death? The broadsword king Chao Yuan might be able to defeat him, but he was guarding the wind and snow alone in White Town, unable to leave. Back when the Aoyama sect had destroyed the cloud platform, it was because he made up his mind to kill his young brother Shuang's son, and it was also because he was afraid of this person. The flying whale arrived in front of the cliff, its huge body blocking the sky. A man wearing a conical hat walked down from the back of the whale. A green glow could be vaguely seen on the smooth body of the whale under his feet. He was the former young master of the mysterious dark sect, Su Zai. He brought back the latest news from the Cloud Dream Mountain. It was a bit urgent, so the Western Sea Sword School sent the flying whale to pick him up. Su Zai didn't waste any time and told the godly swordsman of West Ocean. The Zhongzhou school thinks that Taiping Jinren has an insider in Aoyama. If he is killed, someone from Aoyama will come. The godly swordsman of West Ocean pressed expressionlessly. Evidence, Su Zai said while shaking his head. The Zhongzhou school doesn't want to tell us. Regardless of whether we kill Taiping Jinren, draw out that person in Aoyama, or cause a civil strife in Aoyama, it will be beneficial for the Zhongzhou school. As such, I don't think the Zhongzhou school is lying. Once someone from Aoyama comes, they will strike. The saying, everyone deserves to be punished, referred to someone like Taiping Jinren. If Aoyama attempted to interfere with the Western Sea Sword School's plan to kill this devil, the Zhongzhou school would have sufficient reason to intervene. Even the allies of the Guochang temple and the Aoyama sect couldn't do anything about it. The expression on the godly swordsman of West Ocean's face remained unchanged as he asked, "Do you have any news about the young mysterious dark sect?" "No," Su Zai replied. "But according to what was said a few years ago, the borrowed body of Taiping Jinren will disintegrate this year at the latest. He will come for sure." The godly swordsman of West Ocean said, "Tell them that the first child sword is on Tianxian Island." "Yes," said Su Zai. The godly swordsman of West Ocean said, "After this matter is settled, I'll ask the young mysterious dark master for the secret method of the sun banner on your behalf." "No need," said Su Zai. "If you can, please kill him." The godly swordsman of West Ocean turned to him and asked, "Why?" Su Zai said, "It's obviously the intention of the great grandmaster that the sun banner fell into the hands of Wang Xiaoming. I think he is the heir chosen by the great grandmaster." "It makes sense," said the godly swordsman of West Ocean. Su Zai continued, "And it has been ascertained that the reason Tong Yan betrayed the Zhongzhou school is because he stole the green sky mirror." The godly swordsman of West Ocean said, "If he has nowhere else to go, he can come to my place." Su Zai felt it was inappropriate, saying, "Now that we have decided to ally with the Zhongzhou school." The godly swordsman of West Ocean raised his hand, signaling for him to stop talking. Su Zai left the manor cave. Looking at the ocean, the godly swordsman of West Ocean stood still like a stone statue. He had known that Taiping Jinren had escaped from the sword jail of Aoyama, because he had met him once and reached an agreement with him. Unexpectedly, the cloud platform was destroyed, his young brother was killed, and the higher-ups of Bulo Lin were all in the hands of Taiping. I'm really not a person who is good at scheming. The corners of the mouth of the godly swordsman of West Ocean curled up slowly, flashing a self-mocking smile. He was merely a regular young swordsman when he left the foggy island in the South Ocean with Tian Jingren and came to Chaotian hundreds of years ago. The reason he could become so powerful was that he didn't care about anything else but cultivation. Every island and reef on the West Ocean had the traces left by his sword work, and countless birds and fishes had seen his sword lights. From this point of view, he was quite similar to the immortal Jingyang, who stayed behind closed doors all year long and paid no attention to the affairs of the world. In his eyes, Su Zai's idea was a good one. It was of course beneficial to ally with the Zhongzhou school. It was good to kill Taiping Jinren, and it was even better to lure the swordsmen of Aoyama out and kill them. Yet, the godly swordsman of West Ocean was fully aware that all these things might be untrue. He didn't have the ability or the energy to distinguish whether these things were true or not, so he chose not to think about them at all. Perhaps the Zhongzhou school would stand by and do nothing. Perhaps the young, mysterious Dark Master had other ideas, or perhaps the Aoyama sect had a scheme. But so what? It'd be fine as long as he was powerful enough. All he needed to do was to kill all of them. He was quite confident about this. It was because he was not alone this time. From this point of view, he was quite similar to Jing Jiao, who didn't do anything on his own, but once he did something, he would come out in full force. This kind of person was indeed formidable. It was exceedingly quiet on Shinma Peak. No monkeys could be heard at the foot of the cliff, and no horses neighing could be heard on the hillside. Gu Qing came back from Zhaoga City after receiving the notice. He stood behind Zhao Leiyu with Yuan Shu, looking at the closed manor cave in silence. Ping Yongka didn't know what had happened, feeling quite scared. The sound of swords being sharpened could be heard in the manor cave every few seconds. The sound of swords being sharpened had finally disappeared as the twilight grew darker. Everything was as usual on Shinma Peak, but something had changed on the distant sword peak. The sword in the cracks between the cliffs buzzed slightly. The sword wheels broke through the fog and returned after encountering the wind, as if they were dancing. It seemed that they were welcoming the return of a famous sword. The manor cave was opened, and Jing Jiao walked out from inside. His white cloth was still fluttering. He still had the appearance of a ferryman. Yet, both Zhao Leiyu and Gu Qing felt that he was a bit different than before. Zhao Leiyu looked at his right hand and asked, "Are you done?" Jing Jiao said, "Yes." Into this chapter, that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.